Tell me when we're ready. Are we live? Okay. Today is March 18th, 2025, and this is our Community Reinvestment Agency Board meeting, formerly known as the RDA. Our meetings are public, and you're welcome to join us in person on Zoom or by watching from the City Council's agenda page, YouTube, or on SLC TV. Please continue to join us in whichever manner you are most comfortable. We begin our CRA meetings with comments to the board. Written comments may also be submitted to the CRA offices and the CRA board by mail to P.O. Box 145476, Salt Lake City, Utah 84114, or emailing council.comments@slc.gov, or by calling our 24-hour phone line at 801-535-7654. Thank you for joining us. Before we start, just remind the public about our rules of decorum, which are in place to make sure our meetings move along well and to help everyone feel comfortable sharing the comments. A copy of the full rules are available from staff. If you'd like to make a general comment today, we are accepting those both in person and online on Zoom. Scott Corpany from our staff will moderate the Zoom and message you with any questions about your registration. If you do need to speak with staff, select Scott from the list of participants or raise your hand in the Zoom meeting or in the room to indicate that you need something. And be aware that staff is handling many tasks at once, so limit messages to technical issues or minimal information updates. Taylor Hill, another staff member, is going to be calling the names of those who wish to comment based on the order in which we receive the names. So if you're on Zoom, please unmute your mic when Taylor calls your name. Now we will open our general comment period. Taylor, please start with any comments that we might have.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We do not have anyone registered for general comment.
Okay, is there anyone in the room that would like to give general comment to the board? Looks like not. So we will close our public comment period. Section B of the agenda is public hearings on specific items. We do not have any of those, and so we're on to Section C, Community Reinvestment Agency Business. We do have quite a few items there. So without any further delay, let's jump into item 1, which is the Housing Development Loan Program, HDLP allocations for the current fiscal year 24 through 25. Allison Rowland, Council Policy Analyst, is here to give us, do you have an introduction, Allison? Do you have maybe an introduction from council staff? We have Kate Ware, Austin Taylor, and Marcus Lee, project managers and coordinator for the CRA.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. These are, as you mentioned, allocations for the General Housing Development Loan Program. Actually, Mr. Chair, just to remind you, because one of the allocations is for the Housing Authority, a Housing Authority division, then you'll have to recuse yourself from that part of the discussion. I'm not sure how you'd like to handle that, whether you'd like the rest of the board to do that discussion first, after my intro and their
board members,
overview.
Would you like to discuss that application from which I'm recused first, or go through the remainder and then we can discuss that one at the end?
I think go through the remainder would be great for me.
Okay,
yeah.
Let's go through all of them except the one specific to HAME and the Housing Authority, and then I'll recuse myself from the conversation and we can go to the others. Go to that one.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is an item, as you might have guessed, for action today. The board will review and potentially approve recommendations for allocating up to $5.77 million in affordable housing funds offered through a notice of funding availability issued last year. The purpose of these low-interest loans is to incentivize the inclusion of affordable housing in new construction and in the preservation and rehabilitation projects. There we go. There were 5 applications forwarded to the board asking for a total of nearly $7.5 million, so quite a bit over the amount available. The CRA Finance Committee recommended funding 4 of these applications with available funds, and those are listed on attachment C1 if you'd like to see the summary. The board will make a final determination of which applications to fund and for what amount, but I wanted to mention that together the projects recommended for funding would provide 482 units of new affordable housing. Finally, this is my favorite part where I get to tell you about the mistakes I made in the staff report. There were several which the CRA staff was kind enough to point out to me. At one point, I mentioned the FY24 NOFA, and of course, that should have been the FY 2025 NOFA. That's in the additional information section. In the available funding section, for reasons I don't understand, I placed the wrong number in the recommended funding for the CRA HDLP funds in the little chart in that section. That's also in the first section. So the total available CRA HDLP funds, it should be the same, both in the total available column and in the recommended funding column. There was also a stray section of a sentence left over in the project evaluation paragraph, in the second paragraph. The sentence that begins, of those four, 3 were recommended for the full amounts requested. There should be a period there. That last section about 1 being recommended for less than the full amount is again a stray. And finally, the final stray is that on policy question number 4, I mentioned that this year, for the first time, potential ownership units are recommended for funding through the CRA. Of course, that's not true because you actually allocated funding last year as well to the housing excuse me, to this type of housing. So I will turn it over to all of you to say the right things, please.
Great, thank you, Allison. If we can go ahead and pull up the slide deck, that would be great. We are excited to be here today to talk to you about the 7th issuance of a notice of funding availability for the Housing Development Loan Program. I'm going to go ahead and refer to that as the HDLP and NOFA moving forward, because that's really long. Let's go to the next slide. This program began in 2018, and this year we have funds coming from a couple different sources that you can see here. We have a potential for you to recommend via motion to include an additional $710,000 that was not originally included in the offering. This is due to an application not rescinding their request and your awarded allocation of funding from the last year's applications. That particular project happens to be Project Open 3, and they were able to make it work without that money. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So what we received, well, the process that we go through every year is that this is a competitive process. We open it up for applicants to meet with us after the applications have been made live. They were made live in October of this year. We had an information meeting in October of last year. We had an information meeting in November of last year, and then applications were due on December 19th of last year. We received 9 eligible applications. However, of those applications, 4 of them withdrew their request for funding. This was due to multiple concerns. There were some issues with other financiers, the sites themselves that they were looking at doing the developments on, and other items. So with those 5 eligible projects, we have a total funding request of that $7.75 million. As Allison mentioned, we do have available $5.77 million. However, one of those funding sources is Housing Stability's Home HUD CHODO funds, and none of our applicants qualify for those dollars. Let's go to the next one. Next slide, please, Taylor. Great. So here on this map, you can see where all the different sites are located, marked in yellow. There's 2 up near North Temple. We have 1 on 300 East and 200 South. and then a couple further south, 1100 South West Temple, and 1300 South and 300 West. Let's go to the next slide. So for the HTLP program, there are a few threshold requirements that need to be met by the applicants. First and foremost, they must agree to meet our sustainable development policy, which requires an Energy Star score of 90 or higher, that they have no on-site combustible or fossil fuel combustion, and that they participate in the city's Elevate Buildings program. Next, applicants get to decide either or on this, or both. Units either need to be family size with amenities for children this year, and 10% of the units within the project need to qualify for that, or 10% of the units need to be deeply affordable to those earning 40% AMI or less. As a reminder, these are set by the board they were set April of last year. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Great. So there are project priorities that we use to review and evaluate these, and to consider the applicants for different interest rate reductions, and to score the applications comparable to others. The bolded items here scored higher than the other items on the list based on feedback from the board and the project priorities that you wanted to focus on this year. Let's go to the next slide. So in the application review, these are the different topics that we looked at while reviewing them, and applicants were able to score different points with their review based on how complete their application was, their project readiness, their financials, and how appropriate and effective they were, the development team qualifications and experience, and the readiness of the project to proceed to construction. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. I'll turn it over to Marcus to discuss the individual applications.
Awesome, thank you. So here on this slide, we have an overview of the 5 applications that qualified and went through the Finance Committee process. All of these projects are cash flow loans. We have summaries of unit counts and total project costs here as well. All these details are in your board packet. Of note, all these projects requested, or their project requests were below 3.5% of total project costs, and no applicants have received their tax credits yet, and they are all but one are applying for their LIHTC credits in the near future. The one project that is not applying for LIHTC credits is the Northwest Pipeline, and they are applying for the historic tax.
Can you hold on discussing that project until
sorry.
I've recused myself?
Okay.
What's that?
Oh.
Marcus, could you also speak closer to the microphone?
So no projects have received their 4% LIHTC tax credits yet, but they are applying in the near future. And to give a scale of projects, we have the range of unit counts, as Allison mentioned before. The largest project is the Flats at Folsom with 188 units, and they all decrease from there. There are 83 family-sized units, and 375 units will be at 40% AMI and below. Another note is 4 out of the 5 projects are rental products that will come online in the future. A special note, after the Finance Committee meeting, the 1300 South project adjusted their plans, and they now intend to add additional 2 floors, which will increase their unit count from 70 to 96 units. The building will have 7 floors total now after these changes, and these changes do not alter their CRA funding request, and it does not impact the consideration of their application. The percentage of family-sized units and affordable units remain the same with these changes. Next slide, please. So on this slide, we have the results of the Finance Committee meeting based on project priorities and application scores. These include the Wade project score, the total application score, and their funding request. There is roughly $5 million available to allocate in this year's cycle, and as previously called out, prior project returned funding. So there is an additional $710,000 that you may consider to allocate in this year's cycle as well. As a reminder, no projects qualified for the home CHOTO funds, which is why that column is blacked out. And the last column has the funding ranking decisions from the Finance Committee listed here on this chart. Next slide, please. And similar to the last slide, here is the proposed funding order for the board to consider and potentially adopt for this year's HDLP funding cycle. The developers and CRA staff are available for any questions you may have, and I will turn it over to you for any questions, discussions, and consideration.
Board members?
I had a question, Chair.
Go ahead, Lopez Chavez.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to clarify, for the Northwest Pipeline, it sounded like the project was more expansive than this. Is this just phase one
Oh,
funding?
sorry. Hold on that question.
Oh, okay.
I have a general question that is, it seems like there's quite a few, the number of projects applying were a lot fewer this year than in previous years. My memory's correct, right? Okay, and then it also surprised me that 4 out of the original 9 pulled their funding, and I'm wondering, this is maybe more applicable to something later on our agenda, but you mentioned issues with the site and with other funding sources. Were any of them pulled because of our requirements, either any of our threshold requirements?
No.
Okay.
Last year, we received 20 applications, and
And remind me, last year's application process, we still had the family-sized or
It was-
deeply affordable threshold, right?
yes, but there was
Okay.
no requirement for amenities for children.
Amenities for children.
Yes,
Okay,
with
but
the
the
family
90% whatever Energy Star score was.
Correct.
Okay, so last year we had 20. This year 9. Basically the same requirements.
So, yes, I think a lot of what plays into that is the market for building construction right now. Additionally, with the applications that withdrew this year, there's a lot to be said for readiness for several of them, not all of them, but several of them. And then just site discovery that happens along the way.
And if I could add one more thing, remember last year we had the dormant funding
Yeah.
from HUD, so that was actually a lot more money, which may have encouraged more developers to throw their hats into the ring.
We were also able to approve more loans, and those projects are still working their way through the process, right? Like from last year's funding, do we have any actually completed
So of
units?
I think there were about 1,400 units that were allocated for funding last year. Of those, I think all but 2 of the loans have closed, and, well, 2 that will close have, or all that will close have closed except for 2. And then the one that returned the funding
Okay.
has obviously
So-
not closed.
It might be reasonable to assume that we approved a lot last year, more than we ever have, and so developers are still working through those dollars, and that might be why there were fewer applications this year. Does that seem reasonable? Okay,
$13.7 million last
Was a
year.
lot, yeah.
It was a lot of money.
great. Petro and then Young.
Thank you. I think it's really exciting to see the family size unit memo went out and it's being responded to, so thank you. I am wondering, in light of conversations I've had with developers recently and the fact that I read at least news headlines, I'm not suggesting this, but would it be in the best interest for us to consider some cost overruns? Like when the 710,000 was first introduced, my impulse, and I'm not suggesting we do this, but my impulsive thought was maybe we should put that to the side because no one has built 25% increases in their budget for lumber or steel. And we know that's a likely case. Do we have any strategies to ensure, like, all of these plans are really great. I foresee the need for gap funding and cost overruns growing significantly. Do we have any strategies to increase that, or is that on our radar?
So 2 years ago, we had a gap financing NOFA that was released. It turned out that when we released those funds, we had applicants just apply right off the bat. We did consider the idea of holding that $710,000 to the side, potentially for gap funding. However, due to the amount of the funding request this year, we decided to give the Finance Committee the option of providing a recommendation to you as a board for you to consider how you would like to handle it.
I'm pretty agnostic one way or another. It was just my impulsive thought, but I do feel like we might be best served if we give guidance. I would be deeply interested in us making sure that the things that we're investing in and planning for move forward, especially when the descriptions of the projects are as necessary and responsive to city priorities as they are.
Young and then Dugan.
I just have a quick question related to the two projects that are ranked third. I noticed they have the same application score and the weighted project score, and one of them is going to be recommended for full funding, and the other had a reduced amount of funding recommended. I was just curious if you could speak to that.
It comes down to one of them was requesting $750,000 and the other one was requesting $2 million. We did ask the applicants what their minimum request was, and the minimum request for the one requesting $2 million was $1 million, and they are actually the applicant that for the fifth application that wasn't funded, and the Finance Committee asked them if they would like the amount over their minimum funding to be applied to either the Hive or to the Flats, and they asked for it all to go to the one application.
Got it. That's helpful. Thank you.
Dugan.
Just going after, I think that is a good idea we need to look at because, the material side and the labor side could be more expensive, but how much would it be, a percentage or a dollar amount? And the question is like, what would be a good gap financing? Because these are big projects, $35 million for one of them, and okay, $350,000. How much does that really actually help you on the labor side, or how much does that help you actually on the material side? And would be actually impacted by having that extra funds? So I'm curious. It's almost I'm throwing the question back at you because you're the expert. These are big projects. We're the small loan on this, and so how much would our gap funding help them on that material labor side overruns?
And board members, just so I can clarify the question, when we think of our funds, they really are gap funding to begin with, right. The gap between what LIHTC credits and traditional financing will cover. But are you asking for a fund for kind of emergency financing?
I think it's better than calling it gap financing. From what I'm hearing from people doing this, they're anticipating a lot of cost overruns. No one has budgeted a 25% increase, and apparently, I'm gonna say this wrong because I don't come from this world, there's max bid contracts. Is that where the people actually doing the work would say, this is the absolute maximum it'll cost you, and would kind of eat things over that? And no one will guarantee anything except labor costs, which used to be the wild card, but now they'll come close to guaranteeing labor costs. They will not guarantee materials costs because of the uncertainty in the market. So I'm just it probably is a tangential conversation that was sparked by seeing that 710,000 possibility. I don't know that I want an answer right now or that it's fair to even ask, but it does feel like something that we could anticipate, that if we have the opportunity, maybe this would be a way for us to help future-proof these plans a little bit.
Item number 6 on our agenda is our strategy for the next fiscal year. So I think it's totally appropriate for us to discuss today. It might make
maybe
more sense in agenda item 6. The problem is real, and I think that, there's different ways we can do that. One question, once we approve funding, so let's say last year's applications we've approved, one of them has already said this isn't going to work, we're going to give you back that 700, or we're going to rescind our request for that. Do we have a amount that staff is, like a percentage amount that staff is empowered to increase that loan by for things like that? Or is there any changes to that need to come back to the board? Because we've done that also in the past, right? Outside of a NOFA process, a developer's come back and said, we really need another $500,000. We've identified whether or not that exists, and we've approved that sort of on a one-off case-by-case basis. So maybe the question is, does that process that we've done in the past work, or do we need to have a more official, like, this is the approved amount, but you can go over by 10% with, maybe there's another thing that we do in our general process that would account for that. But if it's okay, can we hold that till item number 6?
I was going to say we could mirror, the city has a CIP overrun process where anything that's over 10% of what was approved by the council has an account that can automatically be drawn fund that does not need to be separately approved by the council, and then the council approves additional funding for that account. I think the challenge with these projects is that they're very, very large, and so a 5% overrun on a $10 million, $30 million project could be a lot, significant.
But I guess for the same reasons that we're going to see projects needing another 5% or whatever, we're going to also see more projects saying, I got to pull the plug, I can't do this at all. And so we're going to see more of those funds being relinquished, and maybe we make a policy decision that relinquished funds can be allocated outside of the traditional NOFA process so they can move faster. Just the way that the CIP overrun account. Making this all up as we go, so there's probably problems, but.
Mr. Chair, I think there's an interesting concept. I understand why the CIP we're going to have, we set money aside. There are projects that we as a city are championing, and our voters decided, in some ways to support some of those. These are private projects. And hence they come with some sort of risk. And I don't think the city needs to bear the burden of that risk, to make all of to control all the variables here. And I understand that we share a common goal here, and the common goal is the housing and the affordability that will bring to our city, but I am not sure that it is on us to solve the uncertainty of the market. So there's also a component on this that is a profit component, which is okay. I'm not, talking about that these organizations are bad, and they're actually great. Many of them are good partners to our city and across the board. But I will struggle with this concept until we figure out a little better of guardrails as far as putting money aside to make this process, these projects work. So a good thought. I think that we probably should keep on talking about it.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Just
Allison.
to add a little bit, a different term for, I think, what Board Member Pui is talking about, I think there may be a danger of perverse incentives if there is an existing overrun account, developers, projects that, might be able to cut here or there, might look for the additional money before looking for other things. And that would, in a sense, be, let's say, disadvantaging other projects who have done the cutting, who have done everything they can, but either they're not first in line for the additional funding, or they chose not to go for it. So I think it's a little bit risky. I'm not saying that any of these particular developers would do such a thing, but I think that perverse incentive is there.
Okay, all good points. Board members, are there any questions on any of the items with the exception of Northwest Pipeline specific to those projects? Any of the 4 projects that are or are not recommended for funding? Okay, then I'm going to recuse myself so board members can ask questions specific to Northwest Pipeline, should they have any. And the reason, just for the record, the reason for my recusal is because I now serve on the Board of Commissioners for the Housing Authority, which also operates HAME.
And Mr. Chair, I just wanted to make one clarification before you step out. I think we, as staff, are going to continue talking with the attorney's office to make sure we get clarity on that. I think you recusing today is kind of like an abundance of caution. It might not be necessary in the future. So I just wanted to put that on the record that we're still figuring it out.
Okay, thank you. For the public record, I make no money from that organization, but I volunteer serve on their board. So I will leave so board members can ask questions on Northwest Pipeline. Vice Chair Dugan, do you mind taking over?
Thank you. To reiterate my previous question, in regards to the Northwest Pipeline, I wanted to just make sure that this was for phase 1 of Northwest Pipeline.
That's right. This is just the first phase.
Okay, and then my secondary question to that, it looks like they received last year $1 million. They're requesting secondary funding to cover that gap this year again. Is that accurate?
So if you're seeing the 1 million and the 2 million, so the $1 million request is to the HDLP, and then the 2 million is through the CRA's wealth building loan program.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for clarifying.
Any other questions? I almost look at Allison. I love your questions, and I appreciate that. And I'd almost like to walk through all those questions if we could do that. And I'm assuming that you already sent those questions to the staff.
Yes, I believe they would have the questions because you have the staff report, correct?
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you took much of a look at them.
So I guess the very first question was just the feasibility of this project depends on part of the HAM's ability to access federal funding. I know we have the CR goes until September, but then we're not quite sure what's going to happen to next year's budget.
Quick parentheses. Should we get Chair Mano back into the room for the discussion of these questions?
I think are they?
I think are those questions related to item number?
These are questions related to the Northwest Pipeline because that's what your questions came out.
Okay.
So I'm assuming they are.
Yeah. If there are questions about the Northwest Pipeline building, let's have them while he's out of the room. For now.
Yeah. maybe they're also broader, but at one point they're also from your questions they're also talk about the HAM or the Northwest Quadrant, Northwest Pipeline. And I guess is it more of a request for additional information on the probability of the funding to continue to be available for the fundings, and what would happen if these funds don't materialize?
So the first question was that the council may wish to discuss with the CRA the potential advantages and risks of funding both applications with respect to the Northwest Pipeline, so the wealth building and the HTLP. I'm going to let Austin talk a little bit more about the details of the Northwest Pipeline. He reviewed this application in depth, a little bit more about the loan or rent-to-own options and other items.
Yeah. Board Member Dugan, it sounds like you're asking about the other government funding sources that HAME is hoping to use for this project. Is that right? So what they're applying for, what they're looking to use for the capital stack is a few different government funding sources. The first is called the TIFIA loan. This is a lending product loaning up to 49% loan to cost that's coming from the federal government. Specifically, it's coming from the United States Department of Transportation. As far as we know, this program is still open and available. It's currently showing active on the government's website. That could change at any moment, so we're not completely sure about the longevity of that program. The other one is the historic tax credit, which comes from both the state and the federal governments. We don't see any signs of the state pausing that program. No word on the federal government. That comes from the National Park Service. And then they have applied for a $4 million grant from the EPA to clean up the contamination that's inside of that building. And that also has not been awarded, but the program is still open and available, and we'll see what happens there. So to sum it up, they are proposing to use quite a few funding sources from the state and federal government, and nothing yet has been committed. At this point, we would be the first lender to commit funds to this project.
Okay, and all these funds are coming from the current fiscal year budget. They're not FY26, federal FY26 budget numbers or funds.
The CRA's funds would be from FY25.
Okay, so there is more surety, maybe? I think, more surety because we've already passed the CR for the funding of this fiscal year.
This is funding that you allocated in June of 2024. So you allocated the funding and it's been going through the process.
Okay, so
it's sitting there.
we have a pretty good assurance that they'll get funded, so I appreciate that. All right. The next question is just more on the homeowner side of the house, and you have a homeowner who buys a place and the market has a downturn, and how does that, and they lose their position?
Sorry, just to clarify, I think because we have to be careful both with Councilmember Mono's recusal and talking about the right item on the agenda.
Okay.
So if you're going to pivot to the wealth building funding allocation aspect of the Northwest Pipeline building, we should probably talk about that when we talk about item number 3.
Okay.
Sorry, not to cut off conversation.
Thank you very much.
It's confusing.
I appreciate that. We got a lot of juggles right there. Okay, that's the wealth building side of the house. So I think most of my other questions were on the wealth building side of the house, unless, and that's also about whether it's for sale or for rent is also in the wealth building. So my questions are all on the wealth building. Okay. I just walked myself through that whole issue right there. Are there any? Apologize.
I've got a question, Chair, if I may, just on the topic of Northwest Pipeline before we change that to a different topic. Thank you. My question was, I've heard from a lot of the constituents and neighbors around the building, and I just wanted to hear back on, when we selected that RFP during the RSFQ qualification, I just wanted to understand better if the project capacity is something we considered in terms of this process to better, I guess, to allow for a little bit more brevity or consolidation of that statement. Neighbors want to know that this project is going to be fulfilled and that the funding gap isn't going to fall through. Do we have a safety net in place in case federal funding in phase 2 falls through? Could phase 1 still be accomplished, or?
I don't know if there's a backup at this point. I think that's a question for the developers. If these funding sources that they've identified fall through, they'll have to search for a loan somewhere else.
I think the board could maybe, if there is interest from the board, you could ask staff, RDA staff, to prioritize coming back to the RDA if those federal sources fund through. To kind of Allison's point, we don't want to incentivize the developer from coming back to the RDA for that money. But I mean, I think federal funds falling through is for sure a unique situation that would warrant a follow-up conversation from the board.
I'd like to have that conversation with the board here. I think it's something that's pertinent. We've put off the redevelopment of this Northwest Pipeline building for decades now. And it's something that we've promised this community over and over. And so I'm pretty concerned. I'm hearing more and more concern from the residents in proximity to this building. Currently today as it sits, it's a beautiful historic building with a lot of dilapidation near it. And so it would significantly help revitalize this 300 East Corner, as well as the different businesses that are taking a chance at revitalizing this neighborhood. So I see it as a 2025 priority for the CRA board. I'd love for us to have that discussion.
do you think it fits into the later discussion that council or board member Mono was talking about? Because I think I hear you as specifically responsive to this, and board member Puig's points about us not having to future-proof everything and assume all the risk is true, but the tariffs will be a gentrifying force, and these projects will be the ones on the chopping block. And so I think it's like a larger question, right? Because this is not only historic preservation, it's also the affordability. And so it feels like a larger strategy has to be at least conceived of. And I think you're right, the conversation has to be longer than just today in order to find the details. But I really do feel like this is a consideration that I wasn't anticipating having to make at this point in time. And so it does warrant a larger strategy. That I don't want to get into a position where we're doing Band-Aids for project by project. I'd like us to be more strategic as we move through it, if possible.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, yeah, I think there are two different things here. Obviously, one is the tariffs and the impact on the cost of materials, which I don't think is appropriate for us to weigh in. And that's a conversation we can talk. But the other one that just was brought in here is about federal funding pulled from these programs that help, like LIHTC. And we just came from DC to advocate about, keeping LIHTC as key program for our city and for every city. But I think that I support the idea of, if those programs start getting chopped out, that we can request those applicants to come talk to us. I think that is a conversation that we should probably have. I am interested in that.
Yeah.
But I think we're probably going away from the conversation about this one specific
that's what I
thing.
think too.
So I am going to shut up now.
Thank you very much. One more comment.
My final comment on the Northwest Pipeline, because it is under Hames, and although it is a for-profit product, it's still circulating revenue back to a nonprofit. So I just think the circumstance of the Northwest Pipeline is so unique to our city and part of the city's lore. And part of that lore should be that we accomplished in 2025 the full capacity and funding of at least phase 1. So I just want to state that on the record.
Any other discussion items? So,
Mr. Chair, while Board Member Mono is out, if the board is ready to make a motion about the Northwest Pipeline building, that's motion number 2.
Number 2 while he's gone.
Right.
I thought it was motion number 1. So we need to make motion number 2. I will look for a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move that the board adopt the resolution approving the Housing Development Loan Program allocation for fiscal year 2024-2025 for the Northwest Pipeline project funding.
Second.
I have a motion from Board Member Puyo, a second from Board Member Lopez Chavez. Any other discussion items on this? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And that opposed? Seeing none, that motion passes unanimously with Board Member Mono recused.
Okay, thank you, board members. So I guess we're looking for a motion.
Chair, motion to adopt the resolution Housing Development Loan Program HDLP allocations for fiscal year 24-25, except the Northwest Pipeline project.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion from board member Lopez Chavez, second from board member Puy. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously with all members of present. We are now on item number 2, which is a resolution for the accessory dwelling unit financing program allocation for fiscal year 2024 through 2025. Allison Rowland will stay with, along with Austin Taylor, and Brone Sebright will join us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a resolution that defines the terms of a homeowner financing program designed to encourage the construction of accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, in the 9-line project area and other West Side locations. Last year, the board set aside funding of $2.9 million, with $1.9 million in 9-line CRA project area funds, and an additional $1 million from housing development funds. Those funds could be used anywhere west of the I-15 freeway. So the proposal today is to agree to, to have the Community Development Corporation of Utah, CDCU, administer the ADU financing program. And this was unanimously recommended by the RDA Finance Committee late last year.
Great. Board members, any questions for Allison before we turn it over to CRA staff? All right, go ahead.
Great.
Ron?
Thank you. As Allison mentioned, the purpose of this NOFA is to find a third-party partner who'd be able to run an ADU financing and development program on our behalf. So we put out the $2.9 million with the restrictions associated with a portion of it being used for the 9-line, a portion of it unrestricted. And the purpose of this, in part, was also to help us meet one of our performance benchmarks that allows us to increase our share of tax increment when we are able to get this program launched. Next slide, please. So we had 3 proposals submitted to the CRA. We reviewed those first through an internal review committee to ensure that they met our threshold requirements. We then brought them before our finance committee to do a bit of a deeper dive and make a funding recommendation to the board. We brought that preliminary recommendation to the board back in December, where you gave us a straw poll in favor of moving forward with our negotiations with the top-ranked respondent, CDC Utah. And we are coming back today to potentially approve a term sheet by resolution.
Next slide, please. So I will tell you about the CDCU lending program that's proposed. This was the top-ranked proposal of the 3 that we reviewed. This proposal, as well as lending, also provides financing, or it provides income and affordability verification, where they're checking the applicant's incomes as well as the tenant's incomes. There are 2 specific loan types that this program will offer. One is an unrestricted loan, where if the homeowner is earning 80% of area median income or less, they can rent the ADU at an unrestricted rent. It can be to anybody at any rent. The second lending type is for homeowners that are earning more than 80% of area median income. This will be a restricted loan, where they will have to rent the ADUs or their existing home to tenants that are earning 80% AMI or less at affordable rents. CDCU requested the full $2.9 million of CRA funds available, and they propose using that to create a loan fund, program servicing, and loan loss reserve fund. This full amount of $2.9 million would create about 15 to 20 ADUs over the course of 2 years, launching this year in the summer. Next slide, please. Here's a nice table outlining the loans. So let's talk about the loans themselves. Homeowners could apply for up to $200,000 of construction loan to fund either attached, detached, or internal ADU construction. This would be repaid with a 30-year amortization schedule over the course of either 5 years or 10 years, with a balloon payment at the end of that. The interest rate is fixed at 3%, and there is an origination fee. There is a special loan forgiveness for those who will have the rent-restricted ADU. That forgiveness right now is that 10% of the loan balance will be forgiven at the loan payoff. The applicants are also required to participate in the city's Good Landlord Training and CDCU's financial counseling programs. Again, CDCU proposes using this $2.9 million to create a revolving loan fund. use it to pay for any loan losses, and then pay for their administration cost servicing the program. The affordability compliance will be done by CDCU, where they'll check both the tenant's incomes and the homeowner's incomes at the time of the application, and the borrower will be paying a $200 a year fee for this. And then lastly, we will partner with CDCU to market this program on the web, through social media, at events, and different community partnerships. Next slide, please. So we're coming to you today to ask to approve a resolution authorizing, as well as a term sheet, authorizing CRA staff to negotiate and execute a funding agreement with CDCU for an accessory dwelling unit program. And we're happy to take questions.
Okay, Board Member Dugan and then Lopez Chavez.
On the, is there a deed restriction on the 80% AMI or less? How long do they have to keep the rented to someone whose income's less than 80% AMI?
Yeah, so if the homeowner is earning more than 80% AMI and it is a rent restricted loan, there will be a deed restriction, and that lasts as long as the loan is active. So once the loan is paid off, that restriction goes away.
Okay, that restriction goes away. And what is the protocol if their income goes above it? In the one case where their income's below 80%, they can go market rate, their income goes above that, or the other where the renter's income goes above the 80%, and how does that play into the cost?
So what we will be looking at is the income just at time of application, both for the homeowner and for the renter. The hope is that this program does build wealth among both the tenants and the homeowners in these areas, and so we don't want to penalize anybody who grows their income after they build this ADU. In fact, that it's likely the homeowner will be increasing their income with the rent that's generated from this.
And just one more question.
Go ahead.
So you have you built the ADU, you have under an 80% AMI, so you can rent it out at market rate, and there's no limit to you moving into the ADU and renting out to your main dwelling.
That's right. That's right. The applicant can rent either their primary home or the ADU and live in either one of them.
Either one of them. Okay, thank you very much.
I have a question. The 80% AMI that you're talking about, just to clarify, Board Member Dugan's question, we're not actually asking them to income qualify their tenant. We're just asking them to rent it at a rate affordable to someone, or do they have to do both?
Both. So
they do have to do both. Okay.
Yeah. So the tenant will apply and they will income qualify. CDCU will do those implementations.
Okay, great. Lopez Chavez?
Dan asked the question I was going to ask, but is that a CDCU requirement to qualify the tenant?
Yes.
That's more of a state requirement that we have.
Okay.
If we want to put any money towards housing outside of a
Got it.
project area, it has to be towards income targeted housing, affordable housing. And so because we want this to be available to anybody on the west side, this is what we have to do.
Okay, thank you. My other question was just, and I'm assuming the answer, but I just wanted to double check. With the loan terms being up to $200,000, is the proposal to fully cover the full construction of an ADU, or to, construct 80% of that and then allow the tenant or the primary home dweller to then infuse the rest of their capital in it?
So right now, there is no loan to cost limit. We're looking at a debt service coverage ratio requirement, basing it on market rents and looking at like a 1.1 coverage ratio. So the homeowner might have to put some of their own funds into it. They might not. It just depends on how the numbers shake out.
Okay, thank you.
Board members, any additional questions? Board Member Dugan?
Thank you.
And then Pui.
Thanks for the questions, Allison. I'm just going this is for 1 year.
The program?
Yes.
2 year. We're looking at 2 years.
Okay, 2-year program. And so the one policy question was, if this is a success, possibly extend this into other areas it could be attractive for longtime owners, seniors who may be income restricted. They have a nice home, but they're on a fixed income and they can't afford it, but they could afford to do something like this to stay on their property. So I think it'd be nice to look at that in the future after this 2-year program to see, maybe expand this beyond what we have here, and keeping people in place, and kind of just not build their wealth, but at least keep them in their house that they've always been in. So I'd like to look at it again in a couple of years.
Pui?
It's less of a question. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's less of a question, more about yay, finally. And thank you for all the work to make this happen. We're talking about this for a little while now, and it's very exciting to see this program start on the west side, that allows our families to stay in the west side. This is one of the goals and the commitments of the city. An anti-displacement is huge. It also adds gentle density to these neighborhoods. There is all sorts of amazing things about this program. So I'm very excited. This is very creative, very outside the box, and I cannot wait to see some of my neighbors taking advantage of this tool. Thank you.
Great. Go ahead, Pedro.
Agree with everything. I think this is a really, really great program. I love deputizing someone else to help us push through things. Did we ever approve plans so that, remember how we were discussing looking at ADUs that were pre-planned so that people could get expedited service?
I think that did happen, correct?
Yeah,
yes.
We did? Okay, good. Because that feels like the perfect accessory now to make this the easiest, most streamlined, affordable way to do this. So thank you.
Great. My comment, I agree with the praise and congratulations and gratitude for getting us to this point. I have both a fear and a hope. I'll start with the hope. I hope that this program is wildly successful and that all the money gets used very quickly, that the CDCU comes back to us for additional funds that we can put towards more of them. I also hope that we can apply the principles that we learned through this program to maybe something even a little bit larger than an ADU, and I'm thinking specifically of affordable housing incentives developments in single-family or two-family zones, where we would help finance a fourplex, and I think that it could be similar to the terms here, but maybe it's $200,000 per unit. It seems like the bones of what is being proposed here could be expanded to something a little bit larger than an ADU, and I'm hopeful that that will happen. I also have a little bit of a fear that with the complexity of building an ADU, even this program won't be enough to get a lot of homeowners and property owners over that hump of being able to build that, and that we'll end up in a similar situation that we did several years ago with the high opportunity areas NOFA, where this money sits around for several years. So my request would be that we check in a year, see how halfway through this 2-year term and see how it's going. And if we need to adjust the terms at that point, I would hope that we could have an open conversation about that at that time. If it needs to go up to $250,000, or if there's some other things within the program that need to get adjusted in order to make these funds work, I want to know sooner rather than later. It seems really good. There's nothing right now that I would advocate changing, but I just know that it is surprisingly difficult to build an ADU, and so if it turns out that it's not, the funds aren't being drawn down quickly and allocated quickly, then I'd like to look at those terms and hopefully create more flexibility so that that can happen.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Just another thought. I know that in CAN, they do an annual report on the number of ADUs, and perhaps RDA staff could work with CAN staff to make sure those are flagged,
in there.
that the ones that are funded by CRA are flagged in that report.
That would be great. Yeah, I'd love for that to be included. Board members, any other questions on this? Staff, any other comments? This was a motion we need, right?
Yes.
Okay, I'll look for a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move that the board adopt a resolution approving the accessory dwelling unit financing program allocation for fiscal year 2024-2025.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion from Board Member Pui, a second from Board Member Wharton. Any discussion to this motion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you for your work on that.
Thanks, guys.
Moving to item number 3, this is the wealth building funding allocations for fiscal year 2024 through 25. And another heads up, there's also an item on this related to the housing authority. So same awkward process.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The idea here is to, again, review, or as in the other briefings, the idea is to review applications for the residential wealth building notice of funding availability, which was issued last year. And the board had set aside nearly $3.3 million for this program. Just to note, these projects are expected to be different than typical housing development loan program projects. The equity building projects may not meet the same underwriting terms as regular annual HDLP products or projects face. And these are also considered pilot projects like the ADU program. The goal here is to help identify where future targeted financing would be most helpful in terms of wealth building. The proposed resolution would fund 2 wealth building opportunities through affordable housing. As Mr. Chair mentioned, he will have to recuse himself for one of those. And these wealth building allocations would also provide family and workforce housing with 3 or more bedrooms. So I'll turn it over to CRA.
Thank you, Allison. Good afternoon. So just to set the stage for why we're doing this as a reminder, so the purpose of this is that homeownership in Salt Lake City is out of reach. Salt Lake City is a majority renter city, so we're seeing a lot of rental developments being built, but not a lot of homeownership. We also are seeing a high interest rate environment where the median mortgage rate is above 6%, and there's also high home prices with the median home price as being more than $530,000. And there's also just overall just limited new for sale housing development being built in the city. And as we know, the benefits of homeownership, someone who owns a home has the net worth of 10 times of a person that's renting. Next slide. So in terms of the overall program goals, we created this NOFA, and some of our goals include supporting housing developments and proposals that help low to moderate income individuals and families access affordable wealth building opportunities. So that could be homeownership models or other like shared equity models, or where we are looking for any creative ideas to solve this problem. And also goals include supporting new or existing affordable housing proposals that help bridge the wealth gap between renters and homeowners. We're also looking for supporting proposals that may not meet the underwriting terms of the CRA's annual housing development NOFA. And I think, as Allison noted, this was a pilot program, so we put this out to figure out if it could help demonstrate where future financing could be successful. Next slide. So we ran this process concurrently with the HDLP process, so the schedule is very similar. We had $3.25 million available. A portion of that had to be spent west of I-15 using the Inland Port funds, and then a portion of the 3.25 also were school district funds that had to include at least 3 or more bedrooms. This is a schedule. We released it in October with an information session in November, and applications were due right before Christmas. And we received 2 applications for a total request of $4 million in funding requests. One was HAME, a rent-to-own program at the Northwest Pipeline, and then the other was a CDCU down payment assistance loan fund. Next slide. We try to keep the requirements pretty broad to just capture any creative ideas to help us develop more residential wealth building products in Salt Lake. So the eligible applicants, variety of private, public, nonprofit agencies could apply. We kept the proposal types very, very broad. And then eligible area, all the proposals had to be located within Salt Lake City, or at least provide the services within Salt Lake City. And the funds that were dedicated to the West Side Community Initiative funds have to be spent west of I-15. And also all of these projects are subject to our sustainability policy, which requires that they're designed to earn Energy Star score of 90 or more, and they cannot contain on-site fossil fuel combustion, and they must participate in the city's Elevate Buildings program. Next slide. And similar to the HDLP, for housing development projects, we use a set of project priorities to help evaluate and score the applications. Given we only had one development project, these aren't super applicable to compare these two projects, but the ones highlighted in the bold are three of the housing priorities that were adopted through last year's annual housing strategy. Next slide. And in terms of the application review, we used a variety of evaluation criteria to help evaluate both of these applications. So we looked at the narrative completeness, relevant experience, alignment with the program goals, budget feasibility, the number of new units to the market, funding leveraging, competitiveness of pricing, and that's a full list on the screen there. Next slide.
Okay.
Let's skip this one for now.
Yes, now we're going to talk about the applications.
Great. Can we jump to the CDCU slide number 10?
Do CDCU? Okay. Okay, so as Tracy mentioned, we cast a broad but intentional net of types of proposals that we would be willing to fund that would facilitate wealth building through affordable homeownership or housing generally. So one of the proposals was from CDC Utah for a down payment assistance loan fund. They're requesting $2 million in the form of a grant. They want to use this for a silent second mortgage product, down payment assistance, and interest rate buy down. The exact use of those funds will depend on each household that applies to the program. They're proposing that this money is allocated as a grant, and that the repaid mortgage funds are then to future mortgage products, so that this can be perpetuating beyond the initial household to use these funds. There would be a 5% interest that is paid back to CDCU, and that would be split between the CRA and CDC Utah at 3% and 2% respectively. We would anticipate that this would serve about 20 households through this initial round of funding, and they are targeting low to moderate income, first-time home buying households between 50 and 80% of area median income. And then we can go.
Can I ask a question on that? The reason why it's 20 households is because we're looking at a sale price. Is this looking to pay the whole 20% down for the down payment assistance? $2 million divided by 20 is $100,000, right?
Yes.
So that's a large dollar amount per household served. Can you help me understand how that works, or is this a follow-up question?
Yeah, so it's assuming $100,000 average for each homeowner that taps into this. So that's where the 20 households comes from. And I'm sorry, I think I missed the second part of your question.
So it says silent second mortgage, down payment assistance, interest rate buy. But basically we're saying if it's a $500,000 home purchase price, CDCU will go in and pay for the entire 20% down payment as a second mortgage. Am I understanding this correctly? Because $100,000 could theoretically pay 20%.
Yes.
$500,000 home.
Yeah, so it will depend specifically on the household. I think 100,000 is kind of towards the upper end of what we would expect per household, but again, it will depend. Part of that is to hit 20% so that households can avoid private mortgage insurance, and then their monthly costs are lower, making them overall affordable. And obviously there are other down payment assistance products available through the state and other programs,
Yeah.
so it will vary.
I guess maybe that's the better way to ask my question. Other down payment assistance programs will say give $20,000 to a qualifying household to help with their down payment. That obviously will not cover the entirety of a down payment in today's market. So we're looking at giving a much higher dollar amount per applicant with our program. But is it a grant, or it's a mix of a grant and a mortgage? I guess the dynamics of that, I'm just asking for a little more specificity.
Yes, so it will be principally a silent second mortgage product, so it will be repaid at the time of resale or refinance.
Okay. Got it. Okay, thanks. Go ahead.
Okay, do we want to back up to?
Can we just stay
housing?
right there on that? I want to say the down payment, the down payment loan would be at a lower interest rate, and then the buyer would really be, they'd be financing 100%. They wouldn't have any down payment themselves. They'd be financing the whole cost of the house, one at the primary and one at the secondary, which is the down payment loan. Is that how I'm reading it?
I would guess it would depend on the situation, that the buyer might have some funds available, but not enough to qualify for the 20% usually
to
required.
get that 20%. And that loan would be at a lower interest rate than the primary loan by, well, right now it would be a little over 1% or so.
Yeah, assuming today's interest rates.
Yeah, right. Yeah, just going off today's numbers. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yes. So is it fair to say that this program would be a much bigger down payment assistance program than is otherwise available through the state or any other nonprofit currently available to Salt Lake City potential homeowners? Is that like that? That's what I'm reading through based on my division of 2 million divided by 20. We're giving a much larger, potentially much larger bump to a potential homeowner, which I think is good, just to be clear, because $20,000 doesn't really help a lot right now for someone trying to buy a house in our market that doesn't already have quite a bit of wealth. So I think that's good, but I just want to make sure I'm understanding it correctly. I see head nods, so.
Yeah, the short answer is yes. It's a much larger version of that, and it has some benefits over the state program where it's a little bit more flexible in how it can be used. It could be used for existing housing stock as well as new construction, which is more flexible than what the state offers.
Okay.
Yeah.
And like anything else, whether the market goes up or down, it's really back on the owner's responsibility to pay his mortgages, because he's got 2 mortgages, a first and a second. I mean, if the market goes down or if he wants to sell it or anything else of that nature, he's just like any other home buyer in the market area.
Is your question that do we change the terms of the loan?
No, I'm just saying is it change? Is there any way to support the homeowner who, the market goes down, they lose a job? How does that affect this loan? Or is it just like anybody else who's getting a loan and he loses his job or the market goes down?
In other words, if someone becomes unable to pay their monthly mortgage amount, would they be evicted like many other people who can't pay their mortgage? Or are there other provisions, or do there need to be provisions for that?
Yeah, that's a good question. We have Todd from CDCU who can maybe answer some of those nuanced questions, but I think in terms of, I think we can speak for the second mortgage. I can't speak for the first mortgage because that would be on a private mortgage. So from my understanding, the repayment of this would be upon sale or refinance of the home. So if they sold it, that's one way to take down our loan, but I don't know if we've discussed what would happen if they can't pay it and they still wanted to stay in the home.
Board members, if it's okay, I think it's appropriate to invite the applicant or the potential recipient of these funds up. Please join us if that's all right, and state your name for the record.
Community Development Corporation of Utah.
Okay,
pushed at the
great.
end.
Todd, thank you for joining us. You've been listening intently. I've noticed the head nod. So if you want to respond to any of the questions that we brought up and then add anything you'd like. And then if you're available for additional questions, that'd be great.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I think the most important one is, homeownership, as we know, is out of reach for a lot of folks. And CDCU's been doing down payment assistance for over 30 years. And just in this last 5 years, it's become really unattainable for folks. And we're talking about the 80% of AMI, and that's the really tough part to hit. And so to answer your question, $100,000 a home, if you do the math on someone that's 80% AMI, they can only get a loan of around $300,000. So that additional $100,000, whatever it is, to try to get into that piece. So that is a large piece. It's not a grant. It would be a silent second loan. It would be repaid upon sale or transfer of the house.
When you say silent second mortgage, does that mean no payments are requested until the house is sold?
Correct.
Or refinanced?
No. Correct.
Okay. Great. So they still owe the money. They will pay back. It's not a grant, but we're not asking for monthly payments. We would only ask for repayment upon refinance or sale.
That first mortgage lender is going to calculate what other payments you have.
To put it in other words, a potential homeowner can qualify with their income for the full amount of the first mortgage, because we will be imputing $0 as a monthly payment required for this silent second mortgage.
Yes.
That's really helpful. Thank you for clarifying. Board members, any other questions?
That's helpful. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Were there any other questions you'd like to respond to, Todd?
You had asked about foreclosure or anything like that. I mean, we deal with foreclosure prevention. We certainly help, but it is up to the first mortgage lender. If they're not able to make their payment, we would help them. We would advise them on how to work through that, but we would be, have to go through that process.
So could a potential homeowner theoretically keep the silent second mortgage for longer than 30 years?
It's a good question. We typically follow the first mortgage, if they were ever to pay that off. If they wanted to sell, or maybe they pay off their first mortgage and they just want to keep that on. Our terms would be a 30-year.
It would be a 30-year term. And if they wanted to go beyond that for some reason, they would need to come back to CDCU and ask for approval. Okay. That's really helpful. I'm glad you're here. That helps clarify for me a lot of those questions.
Thank you. Thanks for considering.
Board members, anything else? Okay, I'm going to recuse myself, and board members and staff can discuss the HAME application.
All right. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So the other application we received is from HAME, the Housing Assistant Management Enterprise Division of the Housing Authority. We heard about this project through the HDLP presentation at 2nd South and 3rd East, the old Northwest Pipeline building. Next slide, please. This is a request for $2 million that would be structured as a loan, similar to what they are asking for through the HDLP. In this instance, they are seeking to fund 56 units that will be rental and eventual ownership through a rent-to-own program. So during that rental period, they anticipate that all 56 of the units will be rented at or below 80% of AMI, and that after an initial 5-year minimum rental period, which is a requirement of the historic tax credits, after that 5-year period, they could transition to home ownership. And as currently proposed, they're proposing about a quarter of the units, 15, would be affordable for sale at or below 80% of AMI. And we'd be happy to answer questions about the overall structure of what they're proposing and how our financing plays a role in this.
Board members, any questions on the HAM rent to own?
I don't know when to bring this up, but I don't know if you want us to go through what the recommended funding is specifically for this one, since Board Member Romano is recused right now.
Please.
If you can, we can skip ahead a couple slides. And then, yes, here.
Great. Okay. So we took these applications through a threshold review and then reviewed them with an internal selection advisory committee who reviewed the applications with the sources of funding that we had available. Their recommendation ultimately was to fund CDCU's down payment assistance program in the entire $2 million using both housing development loan funds and funds from the West Side Community Initiative that CDCU would be able to spend west of I-15. For the Housing Authority proposal, they're proposing a split between the Housing Development Loan Fund and school district family housing, given the number of 3-bedroom units that will be in that development. This will be a partial funding request, about $1.2 million of their $2 million request.
Do we know, will you help me understand what the final product cost or what their viability in terms of sale will look like? Do we have an estimate?
Of the sale prices or?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So what they have committed to is our minimum requirement is that 20% of units will be affordable at or below 80% of AMI. They have provided us with preliminary numbers using traditional financing. I don't know if I have those directly in front of me, but we could pull those up if you'd like them. Yeah, like 200, what was it? Yeah, 300 to 500,000. Some of the 1-bedroom units are lower than that. Yeah.
Okay, I was just wondering, due to the terms with the repayment being through the unit sales, I think that's great. I mean, this is really obviously a product that, one, you don't see constructed in downtown at all. And I think this is a really good use of leveraging our funding availability for the phase 2. In terms of our commitment to bringing families into downtown, I just want to reiterate that. So very, very critical component here, and the down payment assistance. So I'm super in favor of this recommendation.
Any other questions from the board? Concerns? All right.
Mr. Chair, if the board feels comfortable adopting the recommendations, you could take action on the HAME. That's motion number one.
So if someone's comfortable, make a motion for number 1. Oh.
Mr. Chair, I move that the board adopt a resolution approving citywide affordable housing project funding allocation for the residential wealth building pilot program awarded to the Housing Assistant Management Enterprise.
Second.
I have a motion from Board Member Puya, a second from Board Member Lopez Chavez. Any questions on this? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? No opposed. That motion passes 6-0 with Board Member Mono recused.
Mr. Chair, just to clarify for the record, Board Member Young was joining online and I don't believe participated in the vote, but she's welcome to chime in if she wants.
So I'll change that count. It was 5-0 with Board Member Young absent and Board Member Mono recused.
So now you can go on to motion number 2.
Motion for
Mr.
item. Okay.
Do you
Board
wanna
Member
do
Puy.
it? Mr. Chair, I move that the board adopt the resolution approving citywide affordable housing project funding allocation for the residential wealth building pilot program awarded to the Community Development Corporation of Utah.
Second. Okay. Motion from Board Member Puy, second from Board Member Dugan. Any discussion to this motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes. I didn't hear Board Member Young, so I think 6-0 with Board Member Young absent. Is that correct? Great. So I think that moves us on to item number 4, which is our commercial development loan program policy. This is, I believe, a follow-up to previous discussion. We have Kara Lindsley, Ashley Ogden, and Christina Harold.
Sorry, okay. Hello, everyone. We are here to provide a second briefing on the proposed CRA Commercial Development Loan Program, or CDLP, and discuss amendments that have been made since the first briefing back in January. Next slide, please. So our request today is that the board adopts the resolution found in your packets, which would repeal both the existing loan program policy and the granary district adaptive reuse policy and replace them both with the new CDLP. And we'll start with a quick refresher on the policy, and then we have a few slides where we'll directly respond to some of the feedback that you all provided in the last meeting and how we're proposing to address it. Next slide. So the overarching purpose of the CDLP is to provide critical gap financing to support and incentivize the development of commercial and mixed-use projects that advance the CRA's core mission values and our project area objectives. Next slide. So some quick key program features. Eligible project types include commercial or mixed-use development that's prepared to break ground within 12 to 15 months. And that can be new construction, building preservation or rehab, significant site work, or other improvements that will remain with and benefit the property long term. The CRA's funding can be used to support construction costs or hard costs, but we'll consider allowing related uses on a case-by-case basis as long as they support a larger redevelopment project. And we have expanded eligible applicants to include not only the title owner of the property, but long-term ground lessees and current or prospective commercial tenants. Next slide. So all projects must satisfy a minimum of 2 of 4 qualifying livability benchmarks which were pulled from that larger menu of board-approved CRA livability benchmarks. So the options include leveraging, where the project's funding request equals 10% or less of the total development costs, permanent job creation, where the project attracts employers that create new jobs or workforce development opportunities, commercial vitality, where the project reserves at least 50% of its leasable space for a preferred tenant type, or ownership, where the project includes commercial space that will be owned by the tenant or made available for purchase by the tenant. And mixed-use projects that have a residential component can fulfill one of those 2 required benchmarks by meeting one of the adopted priorities of the CRA's housing development funding strategy, which I think is item number 6 on today's agenda. Next slide. So the maximum amount that could be borrowed through the program is $2 million. The standard loan term is 5 years, and the standard interest rate is 3% plus the Treasury yield curve rate, which as of yesterday was 4.11%. So that starting interest rate today would be 7.11%. Next slide. And I'd say the only real material change made to the policy since we last met is in the building preservation or rehabilitation section. You may recall we had left that really open-ended and proposed to forgive the flat $200,000 of the loan principal for any project that involves the reuse of an existing building. And the board provided some great feedback. We tried to address the best we could. So first, instead of the flat $200,000, we're proposing to forgive 20% of the loan principal amount or $200,000, whichever is greater, at the end of the loan term. So that would result in a larger forgivable loan amount for larger projects while maintaining a minimum for smaller projects, which are more likely to be undertaken by tenants, business owners, or smaller developers. We're also proposing a set of eligibility criteria that covers building age, condition, and imposes a minimum footprint requirement, limits modifications that can be made to the existing building, and then adds a restrictive covenant requirement. And if any of this language looks familiar to you, it's because we borrowed most of it from the zoning ordinance, their building preservation incentives, which the council adopted last summer. And we figured it reflects the city's priorities for encouraging adaptive reuse, so why reinvent the wheel with this loan policy? I just wanted to pause to, we talked about this a lot last time, so I wanted to make sure there aren't any questions or comments here.
Board members, any questions on that? Can we just go through them really quickly? So building age, 50 years old. Building condition, economically challenged. So that's to say, like, it can't be a building that is in perfect condition, someone just moved out and they're looking to put in a new tenant. Is that?
So I remember that was brought up last time, and I was thinking about it. I think the thing to keep in mind is that the projects will still have to meet the threshold requirements of the program, the general program, which involves, it's going to be a significant redevelopment or construction project. So I don't think that the scope in your scenario is significant enough.
I mean, I'm reading it correctly. You can't use this if you could just get the keys and walk in and occupy it.
Yeah.
These buildings cannot be occupied. You know, you've got the keys, you own it, but you can't go in and start living in there or working in there because it needs too much renovation.
Yeah, some kind of challenge needs to be overcome for it to be put back
there's a few more challenges to be overcome for it to take occupancy of the building.
Correct.
Okay.
So is this all 5 must be met, or 3 out of the 5, or how? We're thinking all 5 should be met.
We're proposing all 5. Yes.
Okay. Board members? Okay, I see no comments. Let's continue.
All right, next slide, please. So the rest of the slides we have cover the same content that was in the memo, where we tried to summarize the feedback we received and how we addressed it in the current version of the policy. So I'll run through this quickly, but feel free to stop me if you'd like to discuss anything. So the first piece of feedback, some board members expressed a desire to prioritize certain project elements, such as daycares, after-school programs, grocery stores, by giving them a higher weight. Others said that the program shouldn't be too prescriptive, and we should make sure it's a flexible economic development tool that supports diverse types of local businesses. So the goal for the policy was to advance both of these objectives in a balanced way by requiring certain priorities that are most relevant to commercial development, but also encouraging additional priorities through incentives that are optional. So for example, under requirements, we specify the project types and costs that we want to support. We expanded the eligible applicants. There's a timeliness requirement to ensure projects are ready to go and funds will be expended quickly. Projects must achieve at least 2 of those qualifying livability benchmarks, one of which implements a tenant preference for local, minority, veteran-owned businesses, et cetera, but it does not speak to specific industry type. And then, of course, all CRA-funded projects are subject to the Sustainable Development Policy. And then on top of that, we incentivize the inclusion of additional benchmarks through potential interest rate reductions. And then we also have that building preservation forgivable incentive as well. So we can go to the next slide. So the second item deals with one of the qualifying livability benchmarks. And again, a project is required to satisfy 2 of 4. So this is just, this criteria is just one of those options. So a project could elect to reserve at least 50% of its leasable commercial space for one of these preferred tenant types. And the board encouraged us to define some of these terms to make an applicant or project's eligibility more clear. So we've revised the policy to include definitions of these 3 items, which I'm happy to discuss further if anyone would like. Okay, next slide. We are also asked to consider ways to incentivize developers to be proactive in the tenanting of spaces, so coordinating needs with tenants in advance, filling the spaces in a timely manner. We put a lot of thought into this, and we're proposing to incorporate it as scoring criteria when we administer the program. We could have a preference or, higher scoring for applicants who provide letters of interest from prospective tenants, or if they've demonstrated clear efforts to engage in design spaces for tenants. It seems like something that's really hard to make it a hard requirement of the program, and this felt most appropriate to us.
It's more like a suggestion or not a hard requirement, but also just their marketing pitch and why they want the loan. In adding, because this is not like a hard number you can give them points for. This number 3. That's how I'm.
Can you restate that?
Subjective. It's not objective. It's more of a subjective grading criteria on this one.
Yeah, it is subjective. I think we'd have to build it into our scoring criteria and process. Yeah.
So
giving extra credit for that.
Sorry, I might be asking a question that you've answered a million times. So I'm trying to wrap my head around how, so someone applies for up to $2 million through this program, but they don't have any idea of who the tenant's going to be. Can you describe that scenario? Like, who's that applicant? The developer says, I want to bring a grocery store in. I don't know who's going to run it, but that's what the community says they want. And they would just build a grocery store before the tenant, because normally you don't finish a tenant space until the tenant has signed a lease.
Right.
So what?
I think it's probably occur most often when it's, first of all, being built by a developer, kind of on spec. But for, I think, commercial projects, just assuming that's really risky to undertake a commercial project with no tenant. So probably in mixed use projects, I could see the commercial tenant maybe being more of a question.
But would we commit these funds to the development of a mixed use project? The shell of the mixed use project is what we're trying to fund, even though that shell portion of the mixed use project doesn't yet have a tenant identified. Is that what this scenario would be?
So one of those qualifying benchmarks, it's a requirement to meet 2 of 4. So one of those does have that tenant preference. So they'd be committing to a local business, a minority-owned business. So that's one way we're trying to strongly encourage that, at least the type of tenant. But otherwise, it is a program goal as well to just get these types of spaces constructed at all, because I think that it's not a product that's being, in the past few years, has been provided.
All right.
Okay. Next slide. So I think we already covered proposed changes to the preservation and rehab incentive. We feel that the criteria does a good job of prioritizing buildings most worthy of preservation, as well as circumstances warranting a subsidy, which was the feedback that we heard in January. Next slide. And then this is just acknowledging we also received feedback to consider kind of tweaking that level of forgiveness to consider a percentage up to a certain threshold dollar amount. So that is what we are proposing today. Next slide. At the last meeting, we discussed how funds should be administered. I think there was a consensus for the CRA to award CDLP funds on a quarterly basis, which provides good frequency and also introduces a level of competitiveness between projects and applicants. So that is how we will proceed unless there are any other thoughts on administration of funds today.
And from a staff, sorry.
Oh, no, just.
Yeah, from a staff perspective, doing it quarterly doesn't add a lot more burden on your end, but it does give a lot more flexibility to someone can't wait a year. He only has to wait a quarter to reapply.
Yeah, I believe so. I think we could develop a standardized process that the same materials and information are available on our website, and we just have dates.
And just dates, due dates for every quarter, this date. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, next slide. So this is the last item that I think we are asking for some more feedback on, and it's related to staff's request to allow the Finance Committee to approve or deny smaller loans in the amount of $500,000 or less. So there's a comment in the January meeting about wanting to be consistent across city loan programs, including the EDLF. So that authorizing language is still in the policy that's in the packet, but we defer to board members on how to proceed with that.
Mr. Chair, just if I could provide a little information on the EDLF side of the conversation, I think that the runway for that conversation is much longer. I don't anticipate that that will be clarified like in the next couple months. So one of the motion options removes reference to the Finance Committee approving loans, but I think the intention would be when we do revisit the EDLF, we would also consider this financing tool as well in context with the EDLF. But I just wanted to provide information about that. That's not an immediate conversation that we'll have.
So you're saying that we can hold off on this conversation and have it in combination with the EDLF conversation.
I think the option to have the conversations together, which I think it seems like what we feels like what we should do, is to do motion, I guess 1A, the second motion on the paper. They both say motion 1, but it's approving the program except for this $500,000 thing.
That's motion 1A.
Motion
middle one.
The second motion 1.
Yeah. Okay.
Can I ask on this part? I'm deeply interested in anything that streamlines services. I do also balance that with the fear I feel over being accused of not being vigilant enough with public money. So if we were to do something like this, could we make a tandem request for either quarterly or like biannually reports of the loans made or something so that we could monitor without micromanaging?
I think we could do.
I think there were several problematic. The post-review performance. The problem is that the money's already out the door when you review it.
But it could be. It helps us refine. I think most of the criteria I've seen make me go, okay, it's worth it to try, but every system has a bug, right? So the expectation of not perfection, but the ability to refine and maintain feedback feels like this amount and below feels like it's not.
So I guess I could provide a little bit of context. I had the opportunity to have this conversation with some members of the administration as well, including CRA, but not specific to CRA staff, and council staff was in the conversation as well about the specific thing. And it seemed like the feedback, and I'm characterizing a conversation that I might not remember the details of, but it felt like there was enough concern about not anybody now doing things, but that it has been seen in other programs where there's like a loan program that can be administered directly by staff, that you start to get things that might not be entirely fair. And so the conversation was, based on that conversation, I felt like it was better to remove it and then come back with a longer discussion for both the EDLF and this about if and how we take that away.
So just more like a guiding principle for council on how we retain our statutory responsibility while empowering staff to do what they need to in these variety of contexts.
Well, and I think the difference, so for instance, there are other processes where like CIP applications or things like that, where we review a whole bunch of applications at once, but those are the projects that like kind of can wait for a once a year thing. And these are projects that like, if the money doesn't go out quickly, the business will move to another city, right? And we don't want that to happen. So we need to approve them more on a quicker turnaround.
I 1,000% agree.
But giving that full authority to just fully approve it is there were enough risks raised in that conversation that made me feel like we should keep it.
Yeah.
Am I saying that?
Yeah.
I think you were, yeah. It's very beautiful outside.
I think this, to me, at this point, I like it. It feels a little more aspirational that I'm completely comfortable with, but I don't want to necessarily be the one who slows down progress if I'm the only one feeling that. But
And we can have that conversation with the EDLF at the same time.
Yeah.
So we just have one
yeah,
conversation.
so that sounds good. Decent.
Okay. Any other questions on that? I know we're not done with the slide deck, right?
Yeah, I think we just have one more, just the next steps. Next slide, please. So yeah, if the policy is adopted, we will start requesting funding appropriations be made to the CDLP specifically. We will develop administrative guidelines that correspond with this policy in our application form, posted on the CRA's website, and then start offering funds on a quarterly basis. And that's all we have.
Great. Board members, any questions? Thank you for, I mean, this feels like a case where we had a really in-depth policy conversation last time, and in just a short number of weeks, we're back having that. Like, this felt really like the momentum was kept, so thank you for helping us get to that. I think that we are looking for a motion on this.
Mr. Chair, I move that the board adopt the resolution approving the proposed commercial development loan program with the exception of the aspect of the proposal enabling the Finance Committee to approve loans under $500,000.
Second.
Motion from Board Member Dugan, a second from Board Member Pui. Any discussion of the motion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so that passes unanimously with Board Member Young absent still. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Look at all the things we did today, and we're not even done. The next item, and by the way, we are 3 minutes behind schedule, which is pretty dang good, I think. The next item is item number 5, a resolution for the Pickle and Hyde mixed-use commercial development tax increment reimbursement request. This is, I believe, the first actual request that's come through from the HTRZ program that we approved recently. Lauren Parisi, CRA Senior Project Manager, will give us some information on it.
Yeah, thanks. All right, so is this on? All right, yeah, so this is a tax increment reimbursement request that's coming to you from developer Blazer Ventures today for their project known as Pickle and Hyde. And if we could move to the next slide. Is this on? Here we go. I knew I was quiet there. Let me start over. So again, this is a tax increment reimbursement request from developer Blazer Ventures for their project known as Pickle and Hyde. And again, if we can move to the next slide, you'll see on the map here, it's located at approximately 800 South and 400 West in the city's Granary District. This project will be built out in phases. Phase 1 that's currently underway includes the renovation of the historic Hydes building. They will be preserving the building's front facade and 40% of the exterior walls in total. And most notably, phase 1 includes the construction of a new multifamily residential building, kind of an addition up and over the Hydes building. Phase 2 includes the renovation of the Pickle building on the south side of the site. They will be preserving a portion of the building's facade, reusing original bricks and repurposing its original sandstone foundation. This phase also includes the renovation of what's known as Ed's Restaurant on the north side of the site off of 700 South. And the project is slated to be finished in June of 2026. Next slide, please. So here are just a few renderings of the project. A view from 400 West looking east. You'll see the Hydes building with that new multifamily residential, a mid-block walkway that can be publicly accessed in the center of the site, and then the Pickle building that will be used for commercial on the south side of the site. Next slide. Here's a close-up of that mid-block walkway activated. Next slide, please. And then this map maybe, or site plan may be a little difficult to see, but the idea here is that this project is kind of breaking up this larger city block. There's that mid-block walkway that will provide connection from 4th West to 7th South, and hopefully eventually make a connection to Kilby Court. So this project is kind of breaking up this bigger city block. Next slide. So this is an affordable housing project. Of the 141 units, 28 will be affordable at 60% the average median income, and then 26 will be affordable at 80% the AMI, for a total of 54 units. This slide also shows that the bedroom mix of the affordable units is equal to the ratio of the market rate units. Next slide. So as Chair Mano indicated, this is our first project that's coming through the CRA's recently approved 900 South Housing and Transit Reinvestment Zones. And just for the kind of public's information, these are a new kind of project area that are allowed by the state with the purpose of promoting affordable housing and transit-oriented or dense development in particular. The state has some minimum threshold requirements that you'll see here in terms of affordability, density, and land use that this project meets. Next slide. So we also have our own tax increment reimbursement policy in place for housing and transit reinvestment zones. We require that projects or housing projects are affordable. 20% of the units are affordable at 80% AMI, or 10% at 60% AMI, lots of percentages. We also require that projects include activated ground floor uses, that projects meet our sustainability policy, and that projects justify their need for tax increment or justify that financial gap. And so upon our review, staff has determined that this project meets all of those thresholds for tax increment reimbursement, aside from requesting a partial waiver of the sustainable development policy, which I'll get into in a moment. And so hitting those thresholds earns projects a 60% reimbursement, and public benefits that are incorporated above and beyond that will get you an additional 10% reimbursement. And so this project is also include, as I described, adaptive reuse, walkability in terms of they are recording a public easement over that mid-block walkway for public access purposes. And then finally, they're hitting one of this year's annual housing funding priorities, which is neighborhood and commercial services that generally promotes mixed-use development and ensuring that there's commercial spaces with our housing developments. Next slide. Or I should also say that regarding their financial gap, which is one of the thresholds, the developer has described in their application a gap of over $10 million due to the decreased cash flow from the lower rental rates of affordable units. And they've stated that this also decreases their residual value of the project by $6 million. Additionally, regarding that gap, adaptively reusing portions of the structures also increases the construction cost by approximately $5 million, and that's compared to demoing and building new construction. And then finally, this project's preferred equity investor is requiring the reimbursement in order to participate in the project. So to get that source of funding, they need this participation. All right, so looking at the policy waivers to our tax increment reimbursement policy, they are asking if they can incorporate natural gas for the 2 restaurant spaces in each of the buildings. They've provided some documentation that the tenants or restaurants they're interested in utilizing the space requires natural gas. And so that's the first exception to our all-electric requirement. Second, for tax increment reimbursements, our sustainable development policy requires on-site solar. The applicants have described that the amount of solar that's feasible to put on their roof due to space constraints really only generates about 1% of their energy needs. And so in that case, we think this is an acceptable waiver to instead have them participate in what the policy describes as off-site solar, which is participating in a renewable energy credit program that supports the development of renewables off-site. And so in this case, they'll be required to participate in Rocky Mountain Power's Blue Sky program. So that's that second waiver regarding the on-site solar. And then third, our policy requires that the affordability period memorialized by a deed restriction is at a 30-year term. And in this case, they are asking for a 15-year term to match the term of our subsidy. This project is not supported by low-income housing tax credits that reduce the need for long-term debt and lower debt service payments, making affordable rental rates sustainable for longer. And I'll also note again that this project is providing a higher level of affordability than what's required by our program. So yeah, those are the 3 waivers. Next slide. I think this went backwards. Could we go forward too? There we go. So the total project cost is approximately $90 million. Over the 15-year term of the tax increment reimbursement, it's estimated that this project will generate $8.8 million in tax increment. And then of that, the CRA captures 80%. Of that, the project can capture 90%. So that is that $6.9 million, $6.09 million that the project could potentially capture over the 15-year term. And of course, this total tax increment payment may be lower than the projected amount based on the actual increment that is generated by the project, but this is kind of the maximum that they could collect from us if it's generated based on the property value. Next slide. So these are kind of the high-level terms that are included in the resolution for your review and possible approval today. So this is a tax increment reimbursement for 90% of the tax increment over a 15-year term. The maximum reimbursement amount is again that $6.09 million. There's those 3 policy waivers, 2 for sustainability, 1 for the affordability term. And then there's some specific conditions that will just have the developer submit information regarding energy efficiency and that executed easement for the mid-block before we close or execute the tax increment reimbursement. So with that, we're asking you to consider the resolution today with these terms. I can take any questions, and the developers are also here if you have questions for them.
I'm going to ask a lot of questions just because this is the first time we're doing this. So I want to make sure I understand how the money comes into the agency and leaves the agency and is calculated. So we've created the 900 South HTRZ. And it's different than a regular CRA project area because we actually identified specific parcels within that, not just like a radius around the track station. Identified specific parcels that we assumed might be redeveloped. And of those parcels, the CRA will collect 80% of the tax increment of all the parcels in the whole area that's been identified, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Is that the 8.8 million, or is the 8.8 million just the expected increment from these specific projects, this one specific project?
Can you go back to that slide so I can see those numbers? Because there's similar. So the 8.8 million, yeah, is the total, is 100% of what Pickle and Hyde will generate.
Okay.
And
Just that project location.
yeah,
And of that 8.8, we capture 6.9 million. The other
That's the
20% goes to the original taxing agencies.
yes.
Entities. Okay, and then we're authorized to give up to 90% of
Yes.
that back to the developer of that specific project.
Mhm.
Okay, so this is not specific to this project, but there's other projects that we've created in the HTRZ that will also theoretically create increment. What happens to that increment if that developer, property owner, doesn't come to the CRA and ask for reimbursement? Is that the money that we have that we can use for like infrastructure projects and community-wide things? Okay. So, but no developer can ask for increment that is generated on a project that is not their own. Okay.
Only their property.
All right. So theoretically,
That's not a requirement of the state law, though. So that's that would be an internal conversation to each city that has an HTRZ.
Oh, okay.
So there are several cities
Yeah,
that
yeah.
have plans to gather money, just like an RDA district does, and spend it on one development.
Okay.
That's not our approach.
okay. And then the $8.8 million, okay, no, the 6.09 million, which is the project reimbursement, that's divided by 15 and given back once a year for 15 years, or is that all up front?
So it's
how does that work?
80% on an annual basis, but so that is the total for the 15 years. So you could look at it as being divided by 15, but it's not equal every year. It's
Right,
just
okay.
80% of what's generated.
Is it accurate to say, too, that it's post-performance, meaning whatever the actual revenue is what will be provided to the developer?
This is an estimate.
Right.
It's whatever
And-
is actually.
And I think that the is it upfront or is it, over time? I think frequently developers will use the fact that it's a stream of income over time to go get financing to free up
Finance against
finance
that.
and money upfront. Yeah.
Okay. Does it? Okay. No, that's helpful. Thank you for
Yeah.
walking
Yeah,
through
of
that
course.
with me. Are we done with your slides, or?
That was it. Yeah.
Okay. So, board members, any questions on this?
I have a quick question. The applicant is requesting some waivers to our policy. And per your transmittal, the applicant highlights the preservation of a historical building, which, there's also some benefits for that, historically, but also like in some way avoiding, the more carbon creation,
Yeah.
right? I would like to see, this will be an interesting conversation, but I would like to see just a little bit more. I know that it is hard to pencil these projects, and I think that we talked about this in the past and how many things this applicant, especially this applicant, is doing in this whole block. But, and I'm not asking for a lot, but I also see projects in Salt Lake City right now that are being developed, even this last year, that still they're watering their lawns, in the middle of winter, in the middle of rain season, and their controllers are not synced to the internet, pulling the weather. We're wasting water in new development. So one of the things that I'm hoping that the applicant will commit to is that their landscape is meets that meets the requirements of good landscaping for waterways, waterways,
Yes.
that is appropriate. Again with smart controllers, and again, I know that this might be a little bit of a stretch, and I'm sure that this is hard to put in a document, but I'm hoping that also the applicant and the people taking care of the property in the future will also be cognizant of air quality and use lawn equipment and that is electrical. We do that to. We are incentivizing our neighbors to do that. We're incentivizing, those, as we know, are very bad polluters to our air quality. So we want big projects to also take part of that. Again, I'm not sure that this is a way of how we put this in writing, but I just want to throw these two things there. I think there are achievable requests.
Okay, just so I'm clear, your request would be to more or less in exchange for the waivers that they're asking, ask if they would put achieve additional goals of using water-wise smart irrigation systems and using 100% electric landscaping equipment. Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. I would typically say that I wouldn't want us for an application like this to get into that level of additional details, but it seems like, and I would be open to CRA staff or attorney's office correcting, but it does seem like if we're approving, we've created a policy, and if we're approving exceptions to that policy, then it seems appropriate for us to say, well, if you can't do that, could you do this additional thing that we wouldn't ask of another property? So because of the exceptions that they are asking for, I would support your request. I mean, I would want to ask the applicant if they're okay with that first, but
I would love to throw that at the applicant.
And get staff feedback as well. But it seems like typically I would not want to add that level of detail, but given the fact that we are being asked for exceptions, I think it's maybe not inappropriate.
I think that the project might be planning on using kind of water-wise.
Can we, is it appropriate to ask the applicant to come up?
Yeah, you can come on up.
Please introduce yourself for the record and feel free to respond to that specific question or anything else that you've heard thus far.
Yeah. My name is Brandon Blazer, president of Blazer Ventures.
Gretchen Milliken. I am working with Blazer Ventures as well.
In regards to the request, I mean, one, I think code already requires a lot of the water-wise requirements that you're mentioning there. We have absolutely no problem. It's part of our ethos in order to do as much sustainability as we possibly can on any of the landscaping, any of the permeable pavers. We're recycling these buildings and not maximizing density for that piece. And so if there's other suggestions to meet, we're completely open to having that be as a requirement, as we already plan on meeting that. On landscaping, I would ask just for the caveat of a lot of times that's a third-party provided service. We would require, and do everything we can. It being 100% absolute, sometimes we may not be able to require it. There may be some certain equipment that isn't available electric or otherwise. That's my only concern there, but I drive electric. My lawnmower at home's electric. I definitely believe in that policy of what we've done on a local level for individual users. I'm just not at this moment familiar enough with professional landscapers that can and do implement that, but we would definitely look into that and want to make that something that's standard across our projects, regardless of the exception.
Board Member Pui.
Yeah, the code. We've been working on the code that with our sustainability department, and it doesn't go in depth as far as like the controllers, and it is a key piece. I feel very strongly about it, but it seems like you already look in that direction, and I appreciate that commitment to a holistic project. So thank you.
Board members. Any other comments? Board Member Petro?
Out of an abundance of caution, I am going to disclose that an associated company, BCG ARC, has retained me, and I have been doing research for them. I have no financial ties to this project, to the Blazer Ventures, or to anything, but out of an abundance of caution and to maintain the trust of the public, I would like to disclose this. I also want to say I have never seen a project that offers us the chance at historic preservation sustainability, and affordability in an area of the city that we want to see grow. It feels like a really exciting time for us to test out this new program that we so badly want to have proof of concept on. So thanks for bringing this forward.
Thank you.
All right. Any other comments or questions? Okay, I think we are looking for a motion on this. There's not a motion sheet, so the motion would just be to approve or deny.
Mr. Chair, I move that the board adopt the resolution approving the proposed commercial development loan program.
Second. Sorry, that was the motion for the previous item.
Oh.
There's no motion sheet for this item.
Okay.
It would be to adopt as proposed by staff.
Okay, so I would propose that we adopt the proposal as presented.
I think Mark, is that? or Keith?
Maybe read the agenda language, adopt the resolution approving
Hyde
the
mixed-use
Pickle and Hyde mixed-use tax increment reimbursement agreement.
I propose we adopt the resolution for the Pickle and Hyde mixed-use development tax increment reimbursement.
Second.
Any discussion to this motion? I think we would need you to add your language if you want that added in.
You okay if we add that, that language? I'm sure that we're going to have need a little assistance but the objectives are, as stated before, related to the sustainability of the landscaping and with the goals also to ensure that there is some level of sustainability to there as possible to the maintenance of that landscaping.
I accept the friendly amendment.
And Wharton, do you accept that as your second? Okay, so just to clarify, I think the motion with the amendment is to approve the Pickle and Hyde tax increment reimbursement request with the additional requirement of water-wise landscaping, smart irrigation systems, and to the extent possible, zero emission landscaping equipment.
You should have made the amendment, Mr. Chair.
I can't. I'm not allowed
That's
to.
correct. Thank you for translating that.
Okay. So with that, any additional discussion? Okay. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Congratulations. All right. Number 6 is the Informational Housing Development Funding Strategy for fiscal year 25 through 26. Brone Subright, Tracy Tran, and I see Allison back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I couldn't stay away. This is the first of 2 discussions the board has every year on the specifics of its annual CRA housing development funding strategy. So to be clear, the things we spoke about earlier were for FY25 funding. What we're talking about now is the funds that will be available for housing next year through the CRA. The funding strategy guides the 3 steps that are a part of the annual CRA budget process. So the CRA folks here are going to talk about the annual housing priorities and the allocation of funding among between each housing activities. For example, the Housing Development Loan Program, the ADU program, or land acquisition. And then the 3rd step, which will take, usually it's end of April, right? Would be to allocate projected CRA revenue to each of the 4 housing funds. So that's the primary housing fund, secondary housing fund, West Side Community Initiative Fund, and the Housing Development Loan Fund. So I will turn it over to Tracy and Brone.
Thank you, Allison. And yeah, this was actually a really great meeting to kind of show how we have used our housing development funding strategy and how we implement that through the year. So all the items previous to this kind of show the activities and how we implement the goals for this fiscal year. As Allison mentioned, we are looking at the fiscal year 2025 to 26. So this is looking at our future funds and how we want to spend our funds and what we want to prioritize. Next slide. So just to give a little bit of background, So to begin, the CRA's Housing Allocation Funds policy was adopted in 2021, and it establishes the CRA's 4 housing funds. So you can see those listed here. And each of these funds have different unique sources, and I'll kind of touch on that later on. The Housing Funds Allocation Policy also dictates that prior to the annual budget process, that the CRA Board of Directors adopts a housing funding development strategy made up of 3 major components. So Allison touched briefly on these. So the first portion includes the projected amount of revenue that will be allocated to each of these funds. This will be brought to the board at an upcoming meeting and will ultimately be approved as part of the adoption of the CRA budget. The second piece, which we'll focus on here today, is the annual housing priorities. These priorities must be adopted via separate resolution, and we'll return next month with a resolution to adopt these priorities. And third, we have the annual housing activities for the upcoming fiscal year. So these are the actual activities in which we want to spend these funds. So it could be funds for the HDLP, land acquisition. Those are some examples. And funding for these specific activities will be approved as line items as part of the CRA budget. So today's conversation will be focused on determining the housing priorities and activities for the upcoming fiscal year. And this information will then guide the funding allocations for the board's approval as part of the budget. Next slide. So to quickly go over the different housing funds and how these are sourced, we have the primary housing fund, which is sourced by a certain percentage of tax increment that is statutorily required to be set aside for affordable housing for each project area. So for example, State Street project area requires at least 10% of the tax increment to go towards citywide affordable housing. The secondary housing fund is sourced by any additional tax increment that the CRA decides to allocate to housing above and beyond what's statutorily required. And then we have the Housing Development Fund, which is sourced by sales tax revenue. Those are the funding our future dollars that typically go into our HDLP every year. And then finally, we have our West Side Community Initiative Fund, which is sourced by Inland Port Housing Funds. And those funds are dedicated to be spent west of I-15. Next slide. So before diving into our funding strategy proposal, I wanted to give a recap of the priorities and activities for fiscal year 25. So last year, the board approved these 5 housing priorities. So we had deeply affordable housing, which was defined as units for those earning 40% AMI and below. We have family housing with amenities for children. Again, this focuses on units with 3 or more bedrooms and includes amenities for children. We have wealth building opportunity, which focuses on low to moderate income households to build wealth through different pathways, such as homeownership, shared equity models, renter stipends, etc. Expand opportunity, which focuses on the geographic distribution of affordable housing within areas of high opportunities in the city that may improve a person's chance of upward economic mobility. And lastly, we have neighborhood commercial and services, which promotes commercial spaces and services that support the neighborhood, such as daycares, restaurants, and retail, so that we are ensuring that we have a mix of uses when we're developing housing. So the activities associated with carrying out these priorities included the residential wealth building NOFA, which you reviewed in this meeting, the Housing Development Loan Program, the ADU program, which were also both you saw earlier today, and then other partnerships. So through the Housing Development Loan Program, the board directed staff to make either family-size housing or deeply affordable housing thresholds for the HDLP. I think you saw that earlier. And just to recap, with the approvals from earlier today, the board has allocated over $8.5 million for the creation of over 500 units for this last fiscal year. In addition, we released the $3.2 million residential wealth building NOFA, which you saw earlier today, and the HDLP. Won't go into too much detail with that, and then the ADU financing program, which was a priority from fiscal year 24, but it just shows that we have been making progress on these activities through the years. And then lastly, just wanted to mention the CRA, in terms of other partnerships, the CRA staff also closed on $10 million in the ARPA funds to the Perpetual Housing Fund of Utah to purchase a property and carry out a tenant wealth building initiative this fiscal year. All right, and then to guide, next slide. And to guide this year's funding strategy proposal, staff has reviewed current housing data as well as the city's housing goals. So I will turn it over to Brown to go over those.
Okay, the next couple of slides are just going to show data that updates us from where we were last year. It gives us a bit of a snapshot of what the current housing landscape looks like in Salt Lake City. Most of the data you're going to see in the next couple of slides are also found through the Affordable Housing Construction and Preservation Dashboard. So big kudos to all the staff who've worked on that, and you should be receiving a presentation about that tool in an upcoming meeting.
Is this data only inclusive of CRA activities, or it's anything that happened that is deed restricted even from decades ago?
Yeah.
That we know of?
Yeah, I'll explain that in just
okay.
Yeah. So this first map is inclusive of everything. It's inclusive of CRA, any supported by the city, and affordable housing developments that were not supported by the city. So this is a map of all documented current and future deed-restricted affordable housing, regardless of source of support. If that answers your question.
What's the significance of the size of the circle?
What was that?
Is the size of the circle number of units?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And so this is about 14,000 units total. Next slide, please. And then this slide shows the number of units that are supported through city-supported funds specifically, and this is just under 8,000 units. Okay. The next two graphs show kind of a cross-section of what types of units have been produced to date. And so on the left, we have housing units by side. We see generally that there has historically been production of a lot of studio 1 and 2 bedroom units. Given that the last couple of years we've now prioritized 3+ bedrooms for family-sized units, as those developments start to come to fruition, get constructed, get built out, we would expect that these will shift over time. But for now, this is what that breakdown looks like. And on the right, we have the affordability levels, and given that a large number of the projects that we support are also LIHTC, low-income housing tax credit financed, there is a pretty substantial number at 60% of AMI and below, with smaller numbers of 70-80% in market rate. And then we have the number of units that are deeply affordable. So in each of these slides, you see 3 different colors. Blue is for anything 80% AMI or below. That orange color is for deeply affordable. We'll touch on this in a later slide, but historically for the CRA, we've defined that as 40% of AMI and below. One change we're looking at this year is changing that to 30% of AMI and below. That aligns us with what housing stability is doing and just general industry standards for what deeply affordable is typically considered as. Okay, next slide, please. So this is a comparison between the last year and the prior year. What we've seen is that there's been an increase in the household income. The median household income has increased by about 3.5 percentage points. However, during that time, the median home value has increased by almost 8%, and the median rent has increased by about 7%. There's been a modest decline in the number of low-income households, but a pretty substantial decline in the number of cost-burden households, and there's likely a couple of reasons for that we'll get to in the next couple of slides.
Can you say that again? We have fewer low-income households and fewer cost-burdened households than we did a year before.
Yes.
Okay, that's counter to what I would have expected. Is there any commentary as
yes,
to?
well,
okay.
In the next couple of slides, you'll get maybe a more rounded picture of why that is. Yeah. Next slide, please. Units of all types are generally increasing across the city. However, we are seeing that homeownership is growing at a slower rate than rentals over the last 2 years. We've added about 2,000 units of new homeownership units, but in that same time, we've added about twice as many, about 4,000 units of rental units. Next slide, please. In this slide, we see that we still have about 9,000 renting households that fall in the extreme income limit set by HUD, generally 30% of AMI and below. For a household of 4, that would be about $30,000 a year, down to a one-person household, which is about $24,000 a person. And next slide, please. Okay, and this is where we start to see some of that longitudinal data. And so this represents the percentage of family households, and everything you see in blue is considered a type of family household, whether that's a married couple or single parents with children. The number or the percentage of households that are considered families peaked in around 2017, and since 2018 has been declining from a high of around 53% to about 46% today. Next slide. And then in this slide, what we see is the household income and how that has been changing over time. And what we see is that households making $75,000 or more a year has increased, while those making less than $50,000 a year has decreased. Next slide, please. The next 2 slides are specific to the commercial component that is associated with our housing policy. So what we've seen is that the total number of commercial parcels have generally been declining within the city. We have a bit of an anomaly in the last year's data where the numbers appear to increase pretty noticeably. We looked into that. That appears to be more of an administrative change in how certain state-owned land has been reclassified. It doesn't reflect an actual change in a substantial amount of new commercial relative to where it has been historically. Generally, we see that the trend holds true, that the number of parcels has been decreasing. Next slide, please. And then in this slide, what we see is that there is still more commercial square footage under construction, but that rate of construction and the growth is slowing. Meanwhile, occupancy rates have increased. And so overall, we see this trend.
Board Member Young.
So I have just a couple of questions. Can we go back to number 3?
Yes.
There we go. So I guess my question related to this is, does the trend that we see in Salt Lake City mirror what we've seen nationally in terms of individuals and families having fewer and fewer children, or are we like an anomaly one way or the other?
Yeah, I don't think we have the answer for that, but that's definitely something we can come back with.
Okay. I guess my reason for asking that is I would be curious if this is something that other major cities and markets are also experiencing in terms of then how they're setting priorities and if there's opportunities to learn from that. I also have a question about number 4.
Could I ask a question on number 3 before we leave that slide? The dark blue is married couples, whether or not they have children?
I don't know the exact definition of that.
Because I don't see married couples with children and married couples without children separate.
This is our data whiz.
Yeah. So yeah, this is all census classifications. So it doesn't distinguish, this particular measure doesn't distinguish whether they have children or not.
But the medium blue and the light blue are
single parents with
single.
children, yes.
So we know that those two do have children, but it's just a single parent household. The dark blue, we don't know whether they have children or not, but we know that there's at least 2 parents or married. Okay, got it. All right, Councilman Young.
Could I add, sorry, one more thing before your second question? I think, typically urban areas have fewer large families, and typically they're more expensive than suburban areas or rural areas. So it might make sense if you can differentiate the data that you look for, that Board Member Young has asked for, if you can separate between rural, suburban, and urban areas.
Wait, I thought this data was specific to Salt Lake City.
This is.
This is for the comparison that Board Member
Okay.
Young asked for.
Oh, I see. When we compare to other, okay.
And then my question on number 4 is just related to, and this is a data question as well, so I'll direct it to you, but how does this compare in terms of noticing the shifts related to what we would consider, inflationary impacts, like, and some of the race to try and keep up with that in wages?
Yeah, I don't know that we'd be able to include that. I think we could definitely do a comparison across other metros if that was something we were interested in, but I don't know that we could conclude that. It's just an indicator that we are seeing wages increase. But as Bro mentioned in the previous slide, we're also seeing a lot of housing costs increase. So our overall affordability might not be much different as far as even with these wage gains because of the increase in the cost of housing and other services.
Okay, thank you.
If I could add again, sorry, I love data, but I think what you could do is map, for example, the annual data of this information plus the general inflation plus the cost, the housing information. So at least you can see correlation, if not causality.
And again, my question is not to challenge the data. Like, I fully support, yes, and this is the lived reality of what I'm hearing from many of our constituents in Salt Lake. My questions are trying to get at, I'm just trying to understand, like, on the spectrum of need related to affordability and these measures, are we as an urban center at like the high end of, need for more affordable? Are we in the middle? Are we on the low end? That's kind of my general question, to just help me have that contextual understanding related to the priorities we're selecting.
I would add on number 4, we're getting really into the weeds, but this is really interesting data. Thank you for preparing it. I would also add that this is interesting. It's telling one story that Salt Lake City residents, as a percentage, have more households making over $100,000 than we did in previous years, and that's continuing to increase. I wonder what that looks like compared to the county, the state, and the nation, because my guess would be that we're going to see that, and part of it might be because wages are going up, but part of it might be because as cities get more expensive, lower income families are forced to leave and higher income families are the ones that can stay. So I would be interested in how our change over time compares to the county and the state and other.
And wage growth. And compared to wage growth too. Is it because the wages are growing for people who call Salt Lake City home? Or are people who have higher wages choosing Salt Lake City to be their home?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I think there's something that piqued my interest. This is one of the things about data that starts opening up more questions, which is great. And I'm curious, and again, I'm not asking you to do this research because I'm sure that this is like it's a rabbit hole that it will never end. But I wonder if there is other metro areas that are able to curb some of these trends. Are we fighting against an unchangeable, impossible task? It doesn't mean that we still change our commitment to this, right? But is this the trend? Is this, has any jurisdiction anywhere seen, a slowdown on these trends? I'm a little curious about that.
I just quickly want to introduce Eric Holmes. I'm sorry we didn't do an introduction, but he's our CRA data manager and is responsible for all this amazing information.
Okay, council members, I will remind us that we're supposed to be talking about the housing funding strategies. So this is all really interesting data that I love that we're getting into. And council meeting is scheduled to start at 5 o'clock. So if we want to break, just keep track of that. But thank you so much for the data. Like, it really is helpful. Let's continue, yeah.
Oh, great. I think we ran through the data slides. So next slide, please. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so this
if we could actually go back just one more. And so basically from these data sets, we pulled a couple of high-level conclusions, and these ones are very similar to what we saw last year, based on the information that we presented.
Great, next slide. And this slide highlights some of the goals from the city's housing SLC plan and Thriving in Place. I won't go through each of those, but this provides support that there are goals to allow tenants to build wealth or gain equity. It promotes the development of affordable family-sized units with 3 or more bedrooms. It also talks about producing more housing, especially affordable housing. Next slide. So for this upcoming fiscal year, based on the housing data and the goals within the city's plans and the ongoing work from this fiscal year, CRA staff is recommending to keep the priorities the same as fiscal year 25, just to give us some more time to continue to work on these goals. Just a couple things to note. Brian mentioned this a little earlier, but a couple small changes on the deeply affordable housing. We are requesting to define that as 30% AMI to align with kind of the rest of the city and how HUD defines like deeply affordable. And the other piece is on the wealth building opportunity. We wanted to clarify this year that the AMI level for this could be up to 120%, which is in line with what is considered affordable home ownership. And this allows for just greater flexibility, as homeownership products at 80% AMI are really difficult to achieve once factoring in insurance, expenses, just housing costs in general. So allowing for this 120% AMI helps bridge the gap between renters and those who are out of reach of homeownership within our current market. Next slide. So establishing the priorities that we listed before are the first step in the housing funding strategy process, and these will guide what programs the board may choose to fund. So to facilitate these housing priorities, staff is proposing these 3 housing activities. These are very similar to last year. So we have the Housing Development Loan Program, a residential wealth building NOFA, so another continuation of trying to figure out how we can be investing in more homeownership, wealth building type projects. And then land acquisition and disposition, which is an important housing activity that we could use to target multiple priorities. Next slide. So in order to ensure housing activities achieve these housing priorities, CRA staff will continue to require affordable family housing with amenities and or deeply affordable housing as a threshold in the Housing Development Loan Program, NOFA. So in order to even qualify for that, we're going to continue requiring that threshold. We'll continue to utilize the interest rate reductions for meeting certain public benefits that align with the CRA's guiding framework. And then lastly, the housing priorities that have been discussed in this presentation will also have a greater ranking weight as part of scoring as we administer these various housing activities. Next slide. So this matrix was created to help illustrate that the housing priorities may be able to facilitate more than one of the housing priorities. So for example, by releasing a wealth building NOFA, we could target family housing with amenities and also provide a wealth building opportunity for residents. Next slide. And this slide, it really summarizes the components of our fiscal year 26 annual housing funding strategy. So to summarize, we're hoping to get the board's feedback today on these priorities, and if there's anything missing or anything you'd like to see in this year's funding strategy or priorities. And next slide. And the RAC reviewed the funding strategy on March 5th. No concerns were raised in regards to the proposed priorities. Next slide. So in terms of next steps, the CRA board will consider approval of the fiscal year 26 housing priorities at the next board meeting. The projected housing fund balances and proposed allocations to the housing activities that will be brought to the board with the budget presentation, I believe in May. And the specific housing activities that are approved will be part of the CRA budget approval. So at this time, we'd be happy to answer any questions and obtain any additional feedback that you may have.
Board members, Dugan?
thanks for the presentation, and I would just want to say to the whole staff, thanks for all the briefings today. We went through a lot today, and it's nice to see all the work we have and all the imagination and the expansion on the affordable housing side of the house and the wealth building and making it mixed use and all the programs that you got going on. It's wonderful to see, and it's wonderful to see the city making all these great steps. So I appreciate all the work there. And on this, it is nice that I think keeping the same priorities as we had last year, so we can have like a stable platform, so we can see how well they did last year, and we have another year, at least another data point is moving forward is also, I appreciate that, because I agree with that. I think we should keep that and not change direction of the ship at this point. Let's see how it's going and then make some corrections once we have a couple more data points. So I appreciate all the activities and I appreciate all the work, so thank you.
Petro?
I agree, and I think keeping it steady is great. I'm interested in knowing if you feel like you have the tools to be able to be responsive to innovations, and I would like to, under one of these bullets, whatever we can do to offer reprieve or ease to the projects that will not likely survive the market uncertainty, to helping them go through, whether it's because a federal agency or a tariff or something. If there's a way for us without hamstringing ourselves, there's no way we can compensate for what's about to come. But under one of these bullet points, if I could see some, I don't know what it is. You all are the professionals. So if we could spend some time thinking and maybe even doing small groups and looking at some optionality, that's just one dimension. I don't think it needs to be a separate bullet point, but I do think it's a separate market force and variable that none of us predicted.
Board Member Petro, I appreciate that. And I do agree that I still see these as the same, these priorities that these are basically the same. I still see these as priorities that I would like the city to pursue. I am a little worried about how few applications came in this year, and of the ones that did, almost half of them withdrew. So I am a little bit worried that we have asked for more, and when it was super competitive, that was appropriate. And it might be that projects are going so slow because of these externalities that we're talking about, that I'm a little worried that we've hit the limit of what we can ask for, at least in today's market conditions. Is there does our NOFA allow for a previously awarded project to come back and ask for more money within that same process? So I guess we haven't seen that yet, have we? Have we?
Yeah. We have. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Within the same NOFA, not just as okay. Yeah. I guess maybe that's what helps, because I think we have a bunch of great projects that we've already reviewed and said are great and that we have supported, that are just trying to pull all those final pieces together. So maybe it's just a reminder to those. So maybe it's just asking staff, CRA staff, to reach out to all those projects that are in the pipeline and remind them that they are okay to reapply. And I think that might be kind of what we're seeing.
Or maybe
those would still theoretically meet the same qualifications because they met the qualifications last year. They should meet the same qualifications.
Or maybe
next
instead
year.
of offering and being like, hey guys, come get our money, maybe we should be, even as council, facilitating some roundtables and saying, what does it look like for you to, especially with Thriving in Place, how do we not take this market pressure and destroy everything we're working toward with Thriving in Place, with the family size units? How do we, what levers do you need from us to help move things along in a healthy pace for us, even in the middle of a crisis?
I mean, I know staff is in contact with project developers often, but maybe that's something that we could do as well. I know that, we had that, we've had a few different things like that we've done, that ULI event that the council
But this record
sponsored,
is, our record of what we've done is remarkable. I'm really proud of how we moved the needle, of how, even if with fewer applications, they match our city priorities so well. So I don't want to have an imposed crisis completely thwart it, even though we know there are some things beyond our control coming.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for the clarification. I think that, your clarification is a good one. I wouldn't like to go tell the applicants that, come back, because they have, for-profit partners on their capital stack. So these are things that, even the city will struggle with the changes and what is happening right now. So again, I want us to caution personally, I want to caution myself, I think, about offering anything that we don't know where it's going. Certainly we, by supporting them, we are already showing that we care about these projects, and we want to, they line up our values very, very, very well. But, we are fixing a little piece of the equation, and I don't know what else we could do at the moment. But in any case, thank you. Just to finish my comment, in general, thank you for rehashing this for us, and it's helpful for us to remember what we are working with CRA now. I need to remember to use that more often. But we have done an incredible amount of work already, so thank you for that.
I do have a couple things I wanted to ask. The West Side Community Initiative Fund dollars, those are just part of the same NOFA process. Are there any different scoring procedures for the West Side specific to what kind of things we see and want to see on the West Side? I guess I'm thinking, and I'm not proposing that we do that this year, but especially because we expect that fund to grow, right, as inland port activities continue. I think at some point it would be good for the board to consider maybe separate criteria for those dollars that maybe give higher priority to wealth building and home ownership projects, which is something that to me is that's a priority for throughout the city, but for those dollars specifically, maybe we give higher weight to wealth building and home ownership than we do, say, deeply affordable, because we know there's a lot of deeply affordable there already. So that's something that I think maybe this is not the year, but I would think in the next little bit that would be great for the board to consider. When we were all in DC, I was attending a housing conference, and I thought one thing was interesting. Every state sets their own priorities for the LIHTC funds, and what does our state, similar to what we do here, has a prioritization for developer experience, and you get more points if you're experienced. The state of Michigan actually gives points for new developers, which I thought was actually interesting, and I had never seen that, and that certainly hasn't happened in Utah, but I would like for us to consider something like that. I'm not saying let's change it for this year, but I would like staff to kind of look at other CRAs that have maybe done things like that, and why a state might flip from going from giving additional points to experienced developers to giving additional points to new developers, because it was just so, to me, it was just so groundbreaking that that's how Michigan does it, and I loved it. So that's something I would like us to consider for future years as well. And I guess I'll leave it at those two items. Oh, sorry, the 30%. Can we dig into a little bit more about that, since we're going from 40 to 30 for the deeply affordable? What percentage of the project needs to be at 30% AMI to qualify for that threshold?
10%.
So 10% of the units have to be at 30% AMI, or 10% of them have to, what's the family sized?
At least 10% family-sized units with amenities.
At least 10% family-sized units, and do those all need to be affordable units?
Of the percentage, yes. Of that 10%.
The 10% that are being considered family-sized units need to also be affordable at?
Yes.
At what AMI?
60%,
60% AMI? Okay. I'll hold my comment, but I'm wondering if we're hitting the limit where a 4% project is going to have a difficult time meeting one or two of those things, whereas we're going to, are we saying we're really only going to be providing gap financing to 9% projects. I could be wrong on that, but I think we might be getting to the point where a 4% project isn't going to meet those targets. Okay, anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and that is up to your discretion to set that threshold. So if you want to bump up the family, the definition for family size units through the HDLP, we can do that. But
I'm not ready to make that suggestion yet, but I guess I'm, based on conversations and just the way I'm starting to understand and see these things, I wonder if those thresholds are, I think the goal of the thresholds is appropriate. I wonder if it's weeding out more projects that we may want to otherwise support. So I'll just leave it at that for this year. I'm not suggesting any changes, but something to kind of keep in mind.
And you will have another chance to discuss that at the next discussion of this finance or this funding.
Okay, great. I think we are we done with that item? Okay. Report and announcements from the executive director. Madam Mayor, anyone from your table? All right, chair and vice chair. I do have one announcement. There was an item that I was hoping we'd get on this agenda that through my fault did not make it onto the agenda. And so I've asked council chair for a special short CRA meeting next week to discuss the Meade Avenue Underpass project, which is a project that would activate the underpass of the 9th South off-ramp. And there's some really great community advocates that have been working on this. And there's a request to see if the board would support using some of the State Street Strategic Intervention funds to help support that project. And so I think we'll plan on having a meeting next week to discuss that project. Vice Chair. Okay, and CRA staff.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I apologize to members of the board who, if anyone thought you were going to get through a meeting without hearing from me, I've ruined that for you, so sorry about that.
I didn't even notice, actually.
So I shouldn't have said anything. Could have just left it. I want to start with a few notes I made during the meeting. First off, I want to thank Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, for the time today. It's been a while, I think, since we've had an RDA meeting this long. So Jen, I don't know what magic 8-ball you and staff use to guess the time for our items, but you nailed it today. So thank you for that. Want to thank Eric Holmes, our data manager. He was going to do the presentation today in terms of how we get to that data on our housing reporting dashboard, but he got bumped for time. So we're gonna schedule that for next month, and we'll get into more detail on the data side. Thank you for the consideration today. I want to start by thanking the mayor for her support and the administration. A lot of work goes into bringing these items to you as a board, and we don't do that without her support and guidance and direction. So in addition to thanking you all for the time and the consideration, that's very important for us to acknowledge as well. And Vice Chairperson Dugan, I want to add on to what you said with staff. They do a tremendous amount of work on these items, and it's great to see it come forward and be able to see it now in action. And thank you to our support staff as well that works behind the scenes, as well as the city attorney's office who helps us. All of these things in terms of getting them through finance committee and the resolutions and the memos and the consideration. Great amount of work, and I hate to use the metric of money as what we track, but for anyone keeping score today was a $17 million day in terms of impact and putting money in projects and making a difference. So you won't see a lot of these for a couple years when we do groundbreakings or ribbon cuttings, but it's a pretty big day today. So, and the programs you approved in terms of the commercial loan program, the ADU, did our first HTRZ TIRA today. Those are all really exciting things to start rolling out, and we'll be putting even more money in those in the future. So just wanted to put a little emphasis on what you accomplished today as a board. On a lighter note, hopefully you've all been delivered your first CRA swag item today. So I think those came to you. If you haven't seen them, I'll just leave it at a cliffhanger on that. Mr. Chair, at your request, what we've done, if we could pull up the presentation for the staff update. This is at your request. For the rest of the board members, this was a discussion we had in our chair, vice chair. And the effort here is to try to kind of expand on our updates that we provide you. I don't mean to paraphrase you, Mr. Chair, but I think one of your best comments you said was, on days like today, sometimes you see items that you haven't seen for 6 months or more, and we're coming to the table and asking you to take action on them. And so our goal in these updates is to start trying to give you more regular updates and information on items that you will see coming to you and that we're working on and spending a lot of time on, but you may only see them once or twice a year. And I have to acknowledge, Board Member Ollie as well, thank you. This is a conversation we always had as well, and I think Darren stole your thunder and took it and asked us to put this report together. And
I think the credit can go to previous Chair Pui.
So I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to say to them, Mr. Chair, in terms of background or Vice Chairperson Dugan, but.
No, thank you so much. I've looked through, I'm seeing what you're about to show us, and it's great. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And this is, consider this a first draft. This intends to be something we continue to improve, expand, and we do that with great input from you as a board. If there's something else you want us to discuss and present, that's the goal of this. So if I could jump to the next slide, I'll try to get through these and not keep you too far past 5 o'clock. First, we wanted to announce some staff updates. Number one, we have welcomed Taylor Folger to the CRA. If that name sounds familiar to you, that's because for the past 4 years, Taylor has been running the city's neighborhood business improvement program in Cannes. And so we are thrilled to have her come to the CRA. She brings a lot of experience. She worked for 12 years with the State Department of Workforce Services as a grant analyst. And so we're excited to have her come on board, especially now with the approval of the commercial loan program. We've already tagged her to help start marketing that and putting that out to the public. From Gallivan perspective, Gallivan has also posted their events manager position. I think feeding off the conversation we had previously on Gallivan, we are excited to fill this position and have someone come in and really help us strategize and plan what the programming and expanding of that looks like for Gallivan Center. So that's a big deal for us. And we are currently doing interviews right now to fill our communications manager position. This was previously filled by Amanda Greenland, who has now gone on to become the city's communications and engagement director. And so we're looking now to fill that position. Next slide, please. A couple key project updates real quick. Mr. Chair, you asked for an update on Ballpark. We put out a request for qualifications for the temporary activation of the ballpark. This is essentially doing events and programming within the ballpark over the next few months after the used lease in June expires. How can we continue to activate it? We have selected someone. We are negotiating a contract with them, and under the rules of procurement, I'm not allowed to say who that is yet. So I was hoping we could announce that today, but we can't yet, but we will keep you informed on that. We also continue to work with Perkins and Will on the design framework study. They are looking to wrap that up in the next few weeks. And I think we are targeting, staff can nod their head behind me, I think we're targeting bringing that to you as a board in either May or June as kind of that final report and releasing that to the public. Indiana Ave property, we put that out for proposals. We received 2 quality proposals, one from DB Urban Communities and another from Crossroads Urban Center. We're in the process of reviewing those. The selection committee will meet in a few days to select one of those and hopefully make that announcement of how we can push that property out for development. We have submitted our application for the Salt Lake Central Intermodal Hub, HTRZ. We did our presentation to the committee. There's a request for additional information also submitted. That is currently being reviewed by their financial analysts, and we're waiting to schedule the follow-up meeting to hopefully receive approval of that HTRZ. And then on Gallivan Center, hopefully you've all seen the release this past week for the Twilight Concert Series. We're excited to host 3 concerts at Twilight, and we have executed that contract with SNS. Next slide, please. It's kind of a project spotlight. We continue to work with USA Climbing in terms of negotiating the agreements for their development and construction of their headquarters and training center. But in addition, we're excited to announce that USA Climbing is actually going to temporarily occupy our building to the north, which is currently housed to SDI. They are relocating, and USA Climbing is going to move their headquarters and training facilities in that building right now temporarily while they build their building across the street. So this is great for us in terms of it starts to activate the area, gets them to have their presence in the neighborhood. They obviously get a benefit too because they will be right across the street from the project they're working on. So that is exciting news. Next slide, please. We have concluded the ice skating season at Gallivan Center. Our attendance was up 2% in terms of what our total skaters were, as well as spectators. Our revenue was just under $800,000, which is exciting. All of these are record marks, and this all came in a year where we were down 10 days. In terms of when we first started making ice, we had a delay and had to work on some of the equipment. And then about a third of the way into the season, we had a repair we had to do, and we were down for about 3 days a weekend. So we still hit record numbers even though we were down a few days. So that was a successful ice skating season at Gallivan. Next slide, please. A few other small project updates. Shover's Electronics, which is right on Folsom Corridor. We have received the remediation funding for that. That's been approved. We're working on the remediation plan along with the county and EPA and working through selecting a contractor in hopes that we can start that work in summer and start getting that building in a position where we can redevelop it. Bless you. And then also we have submitted a zoning petition for the Rio Grande District to change the zoning to D4, which puts it at the same zoning as our sports entertainment zone. And so that will provide us increased density to help market those properties. And I believe that's the last slide. So I'm happy to answer any questions. As I said, we'll take any feedback at any time if there's something you'd like us to add and expand or change as part of these updates.
That was really helpful. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Some of them I didn't even remember were things. So
there you go. That's our goal. We're going to refresh your memory.
That was great. Board members. All right. I think that there is one written briefing, which is the status report on commercial loan portfolio. So board members take a look at that. We do not have a closed session, correct? And so we are adjourned. Council Chair, when would you like to reconvene?
Pretty quick, so everybody just maybe 5 minutes? Okay, thanks.
Thanks.